Hello, dear friends. Today we will read the memoirs of Toshihiro Ora. He was an officer in the Japanese Army. It was posted near the Munda Point airfield on the southwest tip of New Georgia. In June 1943, about 5 months after America's final victory at Guadalcanal, U.S. forces continued their advance through the Solomon Islands by commencing operations against Japanese-held New Georgia. A major goal of the campaign was the capture of the airfield at Munda Point. On June 30th, American troops landed on Rendova Island, about 8 miles southeast of Munda. Several days later, 2 regiments of the 43rd Infantry Division began landing at Zenana, on New Georgia, about 8 miles east of Munda. U.S. forces had already come ashore at the southeast tip of the island and would soon land on its northern shore. American commanders quickly deployed artillery on Rendova and the nearby Channel Islands with which to support their westward drive to capture Munda Point. Well now, let's get started. June 29. I wonder if they will come today. Last night it drizzled and there was a breeze, making me feel rather uncomfortable. When I awoke at 4 this morning, rain clouds filled the sky, but there was still a breeze. The swell of the sea was higher than usual. However, the clouds seemed to be breaking. I have become used to combat, and I have no fear. In yesterday's raid, our Air Force suffered no losses, while 9 enemy planes were confirmed as having been shot down and 3 others doubtful. Battle gains are positively in favor of our victory, and our belief in our invincibility is at last high. Some donuts were brought to the officers' room from the Field Defense HQ, which were made by the Nantou Detachment. They were awfully small ones, but I think each one of us had 20 or so. Whether they were actually tasty or not did not make much difference because of our craving for sweets. Each one was a treasure in itself. While eating the donuts, I lay down on the sand. I pulled out the handbook my father had bought for me, which was now all in pieces from a bomb fragment. As I looked at the map from my homeland, which was dear to me, I thought I would like to go to a hot spring with my parents when I get home. I thought of going there and here. This map of the homeland, when back home, would be of no use other than for traveling. Right now, it has spiritual meaning rather than a material value, a meaning that is 10 times its value by making me happy and by consoling me. June 30th. At last, the final decisive battle has come. I will relate briefly the progress since last night. Last night at 7:10, Kolombangara received naval gunfire. At 8, a blue signal flare from Rendova went up. I saw 4 enemy warships. At 4:10 this morning, rain clouds hovered over us. At Rendova, 4 cruisers, 2 destroyers, 2 transports, and countless boats appeared. The enemy fired lightly, and the shore batteries replied fiercely. Our guns and air power seemed weak. The enemy used countless numbers of boats and landed on Rendova. At 8 a.m., our planes finally came. At 8:30, the warships withdrew. About 20 planes kept watch from the sky at all times. There were no friendly planes above. Early in the morning, we fired 30 rounds at enemy ships at a distance of 8,500 meters. At daylight, there was naval gunfire and a daylight enemy landing. At 2 p.m., some planes came from the west, Rabaul, I believe because about 30 medium attack planes are sure a sight. We are moved to tears and waved our hands, saying, "We are counting on you, we're counting on you." A report soon came in that enemy transports and warships had been sunk. At 2:30, a large formation of 70 planes raided our positions with immense bombs, but no direct hits were scored. July 1st. We received heavy shelling from naval vessels. There was a new attack on Rendova by enemy forces. The report of destroyers shelling Rendova was received, and conjectures of all sorts were exchanged. Only a few enemy night fighters appeared, and they only circled the coast from time to time. Rain clouds fell about us, and at times when we were doing shelter work we couldn't see. We transported ammunition, and when we completed the work, it was 2:30 a.m. All through the night, the enemy's boats moved about. There were no landings, but at dawn, 4 a.m., there were already 4 enemy warships in nearby waters. At 4:40, enemy fighter planes appeared. After that, 20 to 30 enemy fighter planes constantly flew overhead. About every hour, the type of planes changed. At 9:30, a friendly carrier-based fighter, a Mitsubishi A6M Series 0, appeared. 2 destroyers were bombed, and 1 destroyer gave forth bellows of smoke just in front of our positions. At times, the proportion was 4 Courtesies P-40s to 1 0. Gun reports could be heard from all directions, and there was a roar of friendly light bombers. I filled my stomach with hardtack, and at 7 a.m., we finally finished our fatigue work. July 2nd. Because of rain, I got into an air raid shelter and took a nap, getting soaking wet. At 10 a.m., there's supposed to be a raid on enemy positions by our fighter planes and heavy bombers. Up until now, there has not been any telephone liaison because an order came from the Field Defense HQ for the 2nd platoon to evacuate after the 1st platoon had completed preparations for firing. At 8 a.m., we received naval gunfire from one enemy cruiser. I was scared to death. I stooped over to take a smoke when the shells came. I suppose there will be another naval shelling tonight. If there were only some of our air forces there, the warships would soon be put out of action. When 10 rolled around, friendly planes did not appear as expected. A report has been received that the enemy was effecting simultaneous landings at Lae, New Guinea, and Arundel. The telegraph was interfered with, and we could not reach the 8th Area Army, the Japanese Army Command responsible for the Solomons, headquartered on Rabaul. We heard that the 8th Area Army has reinforced nearby units to full strength and has already turned the offensive. Don't the super dreadnoughts, Yamato, and Musashi ever move? No. Heavy naval shelling continues. At 1:20 p.m., I heard what I thought was the shelling of several ships. It turned out to be friendly bombers. The roar was terrific. To those without binoculars, these were identified as Boeing B-17s. I wonder how they felt about these supposed 30 Boeings with fighter planes until they were informed they were friendly. What they thought to be an enemy formation were new model heavy Mitsubishi G4M2 Betty bombers. July 3rd. What kind of operation could our troops be planning? Everything is as the enemy wishes it. Today, again, no friendly planes appeared. Not even a boat came. Since the enemy landed, 4 days have passed, and it must be about time they have completed their positions and general preparations. If we are going to fight, now is the time. Come and get us. I pray that our movements begin an hour sooner or even a day sooner. If it were now, we could beat them. However, we are outnumbered 10-1, and our material and provisions are limited. If we would only sacrifice a little and pound them on Rendova with the Air Force and naval shelling, it would be all right. But the way things are going right now, we're just waiting to be struck by the enemy. July 4th. At 6 last evening, we received a report that the enemy is on the nearest island about 1,000.
The beacons worked. The Rakghouls are dead.
Yes, I knew you'd do it. Those rats won't threaten us for a while. With you on our side, my lord, there's no way Taris gets rebuilt. Good luck out there. I'd follow you out, but I still owe my teammates some pirate blood.
Meters south of our positions, so we fired with 25mm naval guns with instantaneous fuses. The guns were located 300 meters north of our positions. The shells passed over our positions. We cautioned everyone because they were instantaneous fuses. The enemy did not return the fire. Last night it rained heavily, covering my head and crouching. I slept in the corner of the shelter. It was a big storm, and there was terrific thunder from the direction of Rendova, but it was better than being shelled. Everyone got soaking wet, but nobody said a word. Sleeping on the ground at night and cooling the stomach caused everyone to get diarrhea. We sized up the healthy men, but
Your serum worked well. The Cathar were crippled.
Good, good. No doubt word of their champion's cowardice has reached the Cathar by now. Those felines are nothing without their pride. You've dealt them a heavy blow today. Well done.
Children are safe. Thank you. It is only a matter of time before Taris is theirs, and theirs alone.
I don't have any color crystals? How do I not have any color crystals? Why do I have to make them like an asshole? So I only have advanced ones? I don't have just a regular crystal?
Che te lokes kanji lui asak.
Oh shit. Oh wait, he's working on the color crystal. If it fit into home, we can get that one. So,
I'll be done in no time.
A task just for you? Oh, thank you, Master.
Smell that. Scorched men, smoldering vegetation, and dissipating heat. Only... Smell that. Scorched men, smoldering only there.
Glad to hear it.
My men, all that remain.
Why not hit the straggle?
They would... The enemy, we've got one.
Let's get it done.
These are the
There were some, like Corporal Nishimura, who had developed a fever of 42 degrees Celsius, 107.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Last night, we got wet too, and I believe it is because of this that our bodies are filthy and our buttocks seem like they were affected by poison oak. It affects our arms and legs. Noon. The sergeant and I ate in the shelter, and we were talking of the landing of 3,000 infantrymen tomorrow night when the descent of a shell interrupted us. Suddenly, a bomber formation appeared from the south. I thought we were going to get it again, but they turned out to be friendly. After a short time, I heard explosions from the direction of Rendova. Out of our 16 medium attack planes, 6 were shot down by Curtiss planes. All 16 Japanese bombers attacking Rendova on July 4, 1943 were destroyed, 12 by U.S. Marine anti-aircraft fire. July 5th. Last night's report was that an enemy force had landed at North Munda, just east of Idawa, the Japanese name for the Bariki River, nearly 4 miles east of Munda Field. Kalimanjaro was shelled by naval fire. Last night, because of poor visibility, both sides ceased firing. They don't fire howitzers after dark because the flame gives away their position. July 6th.
Sure you'll be all right?
There is a little mountain artillery fire from our side. We could hear the sound of the enemy's boats, but aside from that, everything was normal. The report this morning is that a battalion of mountain artillery and 2 battalions of infantry have landed for guard duty. At 5 a.m., there was the sound of bombs bursting around North Munda. This more than likely is the landing of friendly troops and our transports being attacked. Because of the rain, day after day, and the lack of time for things to dry out, the moldy, sharp odor is terrific. Everything is soaking wet. Private Ota isn't orderly because Iwasato was sick. He used to live with his mother, who was his only living relative. He had supported her by working in a factory. Because he was called up, his 64-year-old mother had to go to work. If they only knew back there that he had come to the front, possibly some help would come from the factory. But he never knew where he would land, and he finally came here. When they talk of conditions back home, they say he turns to tears. I feel sorry for him. July 7th. The shelling stopped last night. There were no enemy planes either. I came out, and for the first time in some time, I felt like a human being. After it got dark, the quarter moon was to my west, at the height of 20 degrees. First it dropped, and then it appeared overhead. If this moon gets round, I bet that the battle will also get more violent. Yesterday, we were supposed to shell the enemy positions, but it was called off. If we were to do this kind of thing at night, one can never tell what sort of a shelling we would receive because they can see everything from the hills at Rendova. I prayed that the shells wouldn't fit well, but they did. I'm almost positive now that they'll come to order us to fire. We certainly must not have control of the skies. Our forces must still be mustering warships and transports. They must be using our Air Force for that purpose. This morning, shelling commenced at 8. I went about unconcerned, lying down when some shells burst 30 to 40 meters away from me, which caused me to jump out of my breeches. I don't exactly appreciate the shelling. Sergeant Major Ishirani, who had gone to Shortland Island, returned last night. He brought some stationery and some cigarettes. 2nd Platoon Lieutenant Obazaki, who was supposed to take up duties here, also arrived. According to what they say, there is an order that 2 more probational officers are to be assigned to the 21st Company, but they are being trained at Rabaul at the present. 3,000 men, Japanese reinforcements, have already landed at Kalimanjaro. Only 800 men landed at Munda last night because of the shortage of boats. The enemy also landed at 2 different points, and right now, our forces are attacking the enemy. July 8th. Last evening, I received my first and possibly last mail from home. It appeared that they haven't received my letters yet and are somewhat doubtful as to whether I'm still alive or not. They learned that I was on New Georgia. They will really worry if the news of the enemy landing on New Georgia is announced in the newspapers. Father repeated in his letter that I must fight to the last as an honorable warrior. I will fight to the last, always for the Emperor. I will show them that we will fight to the last. March 6th. There is nothing quite so doubtful as to whether life or death be with one. Yet we write at random, like searching and traversing a battlefield. March 31st. Pray for cherished glory. My aged father wrote on April 12th. Even though your soul should remain in the South Sea Islands, follow the will of heaven. Hardly any correspondence of the entire company was more than my own. The men came up and said, "Sir, it really turned out to be a great mistake to send the Sergeant Major to Shortland, since it turned out to be all for your good." Everyone laughed. It's all because of my father's thoughtfulness. July 9th. The artillery barrage started at 2 a.m. There were great numbers of tracer shells, which made it like day. However, the tracer shells went overhead and did not hit within the positions. At 5, the firing ceased. During this shelling, 2nd Lieutenant Imura, a graduate of Naseda University, who was attached to the Searchlight Battalion, and 1 other soldier were killed by a direct hit. Many officers of my immediate acquaintance were dying right alongside. When the shelling ceased, 3 Zero planes came over to reconnoiter and then returned. At 7:30 a.m., about 50 Grummons, TBFs, came over. Since our positions could be clearly seen from Rendova, we could not fire. I was really fed up when the order came from the Field Defense HQ to fire. Our CO began to feel sympathy toward the men. We couldn't figure out any way to fire that wasn't to our disadvantage. After he laughingly said, "I would like to die now after seeing the action of our troops," he continued by saying that he would leave all the decisions up to the platoon leaders. He showed a sense of sympathy and never came out with an order to fire. If our operations would only start, I would fire again and again, even though our positions would be exposed and we would in turn be fired upon. As it is now, we are being fired upon, and we have not returned fire. Enemy planes are constantly overhead, so I can't even take a step outside of our shelters. If we were to fire now, they would concentrate their fire on us, and our emplacements would be leveled. And then all of us would be annihilated together. We shall fight. Right now, living is more important. In the last stages of this battle, if we can stop the tanks from coming in from the south, then we can die laughing. July 10th. The shelling is fierce. But aside from a little scare, the results have been nil. But still, if a shell were to hit our shelter, we're goners. All of the personnel wearing steel helmets within the shelters waited quietly for action. The heat in the shelter was like that of a cellar, and the
What am I
unpleasant
supposed to
odor
be
drifted
doing?
about. It is suicidal to go to the latrine.
What the fuck
I
were
put
you
on my
doing,
helmet,
lady?
and after I had made complete preparations, I took
You
off for
weren't
the bomb
healing,
crater,
you weren't doing anything, you
which
were
was
just
in front
sitting
of
there.
me.
What the fuck?
While I was defecating, 6 or 7 shells fell, so I took off and came back. At 3:30 p.m., the shelling ceased. The artillery's
I wanted
accuracy
someone
has become a
useless.
real
Like,
thing.
fucking
We
call
can never
someone
tell
I
when
knew.
we are to die.
Take
Oh
it
God.
easy.
Holy
I would like to
shit.
die after seeing the action of our invincible Imperial forces. After looking at a dud, I can see that the enemy's artillery is 150 millimeters, 155 millimeters actually. July 11th. The 13th Infantry Regiment, which was scheduled to land last night, did so at
How is this a
Byroko
healer
Harbor.
class? I can't even fucking heal
We are
myself.
about to take the initiative. At 7:40 a.m., 45 carrier-based Grumman's
I only
appeared.
imagine when, like,
Aside from a
someone's
close
actually
hit,
getting their shit
all of the
rocked in,
rest
like,
of the
a
bombs
dungeon
were
or
dropped
something.
elsewhere.
I can't imagine
During the
good
afternoon, for
healers.
about 2.5 hours, concentrated fire rained on us. The enemy had fired at least 2,000 rounds today. Some hit within 5 meters of my shelter. At this rate, day after tomorrow, I'll be a goner. The enemy is firing about 20 rounds at a time. Regardless of what shelter I may be in, at the present rate, it will be of no avail. One of our precious guns was lost in today's bombing. July 12th. Last evening, I was watching the shelling and some fell within 3 meters of the positions. It is really a mystery why there have not been any personnel losses up until now. Right now, I am lying on my side, facing Rendova, with the acting operator, First Class Private Tomioka. But today or sometime tomorrow, I guess, we'll be hit. If our last gun were to be destroyed, then our company would become a labor outfit. Since our mission is that of a tank destroyer unit, we couldn't very well stay hidden. We went out to take a peep to the south several times. Fortunately, there were no tanks. When the shelling ceased, we were on the verge of collapse from fatigue and lack of sleep. At 7 a.m., about 40 Douglas SBD bombers effected a general bombing. After about 8:50, we had a concentration of fire on our positions. The 4th Squad's gun was knocked out. One shell burst south and to one side of our shelter, and this made several marks on the aiming apparatus and the barrel. The ammunition was set afire. Demolition shells must be good only for things above ground level, because queer as it may seem, the personnel are still intact. This winds up things for this 3rd platoon leader with the loss of 3 guns. Losing the guns puts a sense of guilt on me, yet the personnel are intact. There is nothing for us to do but feel fortunate in the midst of all the bad luck. From now on, we are a labor company. July 13th. All the personnel assembled where the Field Defense HQ was located. In the midst of shelling, after having come through the dark jungle and over muddy paths, we dug dugouts in the empty area. After getting wet from the evening dew, we lay down. The distance we traveled really was hard going, so much that it hardly can be expressed. Sergeant Takaki died last night in the naval shelling. The dead already amounted to 6 to 7 men. Lance Corporal Ito and 4 men who were handling rations are missing. I must say that there is close cooperation between the enemy's air, land, and naval forces. Our forces have not carried out a large-scale bombing. They haven't shelled Rendova with a single battleship, nor have they given the army any heavy artillery pieces. What do you call this? How could such action be called modern war? I keenly feel the poor liaison of the Japanese forces and the weakness
Perhaps
of
you
our
would like
military
to
strength.
Privilege.
My, this is really disheartening. We haven't been fighting, merely dying in the midst of bombs and shelling. However, the Japanese forces couldn't let the enemy have his own way. We must look forward with expectations that something will be done. Probational Officer Aura, the author, has been ordered to be the rifle platoon leader. Probational Officer Takagi has been ordered to be the CO of the 41st Battalion. We are to provide defense and security against the enemy, who is penetrating into the area of North Munda. The organization is now 27 men and a company of 3 squads. We are to make it impossible for an advance and attack to be made from any direction. July 14th. Several enemy planes came over early this morning and circled at low altitude to our rear. After every reconnoitering, shelling would follow. We are doing our best camouflaging right now. Evidently, we haven't been exposed because shells are landing 300 meters to our left and right. The sick, with 2nd Lieutenant Hattori, are to return from the 41st Battalion sometime today. I am supposed to be in charge of them, and they are to be the 2nd Platoon. I am also to be in command of the Rifle Platoon. We rested at battalion headquarters for a little while when the order came for us to wait at the former positions, so we returned. Shells were falling, and there were patients being carried in on stretchers while fighters hovered over us in plain daylight. It was so bad I can't go on talking about it. At 11 a.m., the order came for Probational Officer Ora and 6 men to go to the East Lookout Post, another new position for the Field Defense HQ. Second Lieutenant Demura was killed, and a total of 4 wounded today. I immediately departed in the rain, and I stumbled time and time again while going through the jungle. On my way, I stopped at Field Defense HQ and received orders. I took command of 12 men, including the medical unit. As usual, shelling was concentrated on the pom-pom gun positions. The sounds of the explosions and the concussions were terrific. I lay down in the canvas shelter unconcerned. July 15th. I picked Lance Corporal Sugiyama, Wakita, Shimura, Maramatsu, and Ota, the 6 best men. Tomorrow, Corporal Takahashi and his 5 men will come, and then we will have a strength of 12 men. We're going to start installing a 10-centimeter gun. The East Lookout Post is the eye of all the forces in Munda. I set up binoculars and observed the enemy positions. The U.S. flag could be seen fluttering on PT boats. A destroyer which had been camouflaged was at anchor. You could call the scene a war movie or perhaps a Newsweek movie, a Japanese equivalent of Movietone or Paramount Newsreels. At any rate, it is interesting to an outsider. The moving boats and bursting shells looked as if you could almost grab them. This morning's shelling was a shelling of all shellings. By 7, they had already fired 1,000 rounds into the vicinity of the Kauai detachment's positions. Lance Corporal Sugiyama was struck. I believe it will take him about a month and a half to recover. Shells are hitting close by right now, so we can't go outside. The offending odor of perspiration in the dugout is unbearable. The place where we stand guard has already become the death ground of 2 men. No one back home would ever think that we are living in a crater. I am taking the place of Second Lieutenant Demura. It is really smelly. They said that they hadn't found the 2 legs of the men yet. 4 engine-consolidated bombers, B-24s, fly around at low altitude. I can see plainly through my binoculars 2 men looking this way from the window to the rear of the insignia. July 17th. I had to lie down inside the narrow dugout because close hits were bursting in great numbers. Present strength is the CO and 13 men. From 3 p.m., the 41st Battalion fired their AA guns against artillery positions at Roviana for about 1 hour. 1 shell made a direct hit, but only after many unsuccessful efforts. July 18th. It rained heavily last night. The sound of explosions is terrific, anticipating a landing by the enemy between tonight and dawn. We guarded more closely. I held the binoculars from 3 to 6:30 a.m., when it was pretty certain that it was safe. I could not sleep on account of the rain and telephone calls that came from Field Defense HQ and the 41st Battalion, and my fatigue mounted. I inquired about a shell that burst nearby this morning. I hear the enemy is increasingly concentrating his troops on Guadalcanal for a new offensive. However, we must not complain because our Navy and our Air Force might be striking at Guadalcanal. If we can only crush Guadalcanal, the enemy at Rendova will be automatically annihilated. July 19th. Last night's shelling was terrific. The concentration of fire is just over our dugout. Since it has only 1 entrance, the air is stuffy, and the sounds of the explosions cause ringing in our ears. It is really more than I can bear. The men were scared, and they all ran into my dugout. I had to take them out mercilessly and assign them to other dugouts. There were 9 men in the dugout, and if it were to receive a direct hit, the entire personnel would be buried alive. July 20th. According to a report, our infantry has completely encircled the enemy at Idawa and has cut off his ammo supplies. A general offensive is to start within a few days. At 2 p.m., some 20 bombers came over and dropped a string of huge bombs. Compared to artillery shelling, it is much louder. The concussion is terrific. The Navy gun below the East Lookout Post has already been fired upon, with about 1,000 shells, but it is still firing. It's a wonder they are still living. It is so hard to believe that they can endure so long. They are showing us vividly the spirit of the Imperial Navy.
I don't know where the fuck she even lives.
July 21st. All night long, there were reports of small arms and artillery firing. I heard 2 wild dogs barking in the distance. I wonder what they could be eating.
Had this problem.
Huge shells burst at the base of the East Lookout Post with great violence. Isn't there any other place for them to fire at? In the midst of all the noise, I still slept well. I have come to a point where I have developed a belief that I will not be struck by a shell. The first thing I'm grateful for is my well-being and 3 meals a day, each consisting of a bowl and a half of rice. All 3 meals are very appetizing. My health seems to give me a continuous source of vigor. To be able to eat a heavy meal during the rain of continuous shells is one thing I have looked forward to.
Of course.
At 8 a.m., we received concentrated shellings of several hundred rounds. The second tent was thrown helter-skelter, and the first tent received a large hole. The siren shed and the tent where the CO had been staying were destroyed. The lower dugout received a direct hit, but there were no casualties. Huge trees which had stood for so many years, and others, were knocked down. Consequently, there was hardly any vegetation to be seen in the direction of the east lookout post. I lay flat along the edge of the dugout for 20 minutes, thinking this was our end, but there were no casualties. July 22nd. Last evening, what appeared to be a friendly medium attack plane bombed Idawa and Rendova twice. The constant increase of AA guns over Rendova has made it difficult for our planes. The number of shells their AA guns and ours shoot is quite different. It's really a barrage, and they make it so you can't get in. The difference between the enemy's firing and ours is that their searchlight units and guns work separately. Even if our planes do not get in the rays of the searchlights, several thousand shells set up a barrage around the area. At 8 a.m., carrier-based bombers bombed several places. Most of the bombing was on the troops in the rear, and they strafed them heavily. To the south of the east lookout post, our Navy pom-poms are firing away. If I am to die, there is nothing I can do about it, so I just lay in my dugout, smoking a cigarette and listening to the wild American-made music of rat-tat-tat and boom-boom-boom. Just think, I haven't washed my body or my face, nor have I brushed my teeth for a month already. One of my upper front teeth has been broken off. My body smells like that of a wild dog. At 2 p.m., I received such fierce shelling that I finally had to dispatch Corporal Takahashi to ask Captain Kobayashi as to our future dispositions. They must have gone crazy in the Idawa area because they are shelling there for all they are worth. From the way it sounds, it seems like a wild man beating a drum. Since last night, Superior Private Makita has been with me in the dugout. They fired several hundred rounds while we both lay flat on the edge of the dugout. I used a life preserver for a pillow and a blanket to cover myself. My ears rang as a shell burst 1 meter to the left and in front of the guard post, and I was covered with coral. I thought that I was really a goner this time, but I was saved. Only by staying in the dugout can I say that I'm still alive. The drum in front of the dugout is full of holes. A piece of shrapnel hit my back, and I thought I was finished. Mysteriously, there were no deaths. We had to do away with the standing guard. We're just leaving everything open to the enemy. Oh, friendly forces, please come to our aid. Show them the might of the Japanese army. July 23rd. Battle situation. Nothing aside from annihilation. No cooperation from the Navy. If I were to compare the complete cooperation of the enemy, it would be like the war of a child with an adult. Our mountain artillery positions were knocked to pieces by enemy tanks. We are encircled, so they say, and about to be overrun. Consequently, all we can do is to guard our present positions. As things are now, even if our air and naval forces give battle, we could not regain the lost ground. Great numbers of enemy planes are constantly up in the sky. In front of the island, camouflage destroyers and PT boats swarm in and out. What in the world could our forces at Rabaul or the staff of Imperial Headquarters be doing? Where have our air forces and battleships gone? Are we to lose? Why don't they start operations? We are positively fighting to win, but we have no weapons. We stand with rifles and bayonets to meet the enemy's aircraft, battleships, and medium artillery. To be told we must win is absolutely beyond reason. The Japanese army is still depending on the hand-to-hand fighting of the Meiji era, while the enemy is using highly developed scientific weapons. Thinking it over, however, this poorly armed force of ours has not been overcome, and we are still guarding this island. But this is no time for praise. If our forces don't move, this island will soon be taken. If we, as well as the enemy, were to fight to the end with all available weapons, then I would be willing to give up, whether we win, lose, be injured, or be killed. But in a war like this, where we are like a baby's neck in the hands of an adult, even if I die, it will be a hateful death. How regretful. My most regretful thought is that my grudge toward the forces in the rear and my increasing hatred toward the operational staff. In the rear, they think that it is all for the benefit of our country. In short, as present conditions are, it is a defeat. However, a Japanese officer will always
remain still.
Sorry about my outburst, my lord. I didn't expect to see a Sith in medical. They brought me down here before I could tell anyone. One of the Republic's top special tactics squads is on Taris.
Battlefields are chaotic. You're sure about this?
I'd recognize Valhoon's vultures anywhere. The Empire's been trying to eliminate them for a while. They're the best fighters the pubs have, you ask me. My squad was following them in the swamp. Thought we had them. Instead, they led us into a minefield. Half of us were down before Valhoon started his attack. We never stood a chance.
I want everything you know about this squad.
On Alderaan, they wiped out an entire battalion and blew up our main ammo supply. They sabotaged our shipyards near Elam. I'm in no position to make a request of you, but the Empire needs someone to take them out. Killing them secures our resources and hits the Republic right in the gut. Say you'll go after them, please.
They will be powerless before the might of the Force.
They're dead hard, and they fight dirty. But I expect you do, too. We found them out by the ruined swoop tracks. I'll bet there's a camp near there. Oh, I'd love to see Valhoon himself dead if you get the chance. Good hunting.
Believe until the very last that there will be movements of our air and naval forces. There are signs that I am contracting malaria again. This was Aura's last entry. His fate is unknown, but given the few prisoners taken and the relative handful of Japanese who escaped from New Georgia, it is unlikely that he survived. 6 days after Aura's final entry, the battered and depleted Japanese forces began withdrawing to Kalimanjaro and adjacent islands, and Munda Airfield fell on August 5, 1943. For the victorious Americans, some 2 weeks of mopping up operations remained before New Georgia was deemed secure. And that is all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe so you can support the channel. Bye everyone, and see you later.
Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Adventures in My Youth, a German soldier on the Eastern Front, 1941-45,
Please use all products
by
only
Armin
as intended.
Scheidebauer. Translated by C.F. Colton, M.A. Narrated by James Gillis. Prologue. Armin Scheidebauer was born on 13th January 1924 in Gröbing, Eastern Styria, the eldest son of a Protestant minister. Armin's parents were Austrian, and in later life Armin himself retained a sense of Styrian identity. However, in 1930, his parents moved to Thuringia in order to gain some experience of church life in the homeland, and it was here in Germany that he spent the greater part of his childhood. Armin's early years were happy ones, spent in a series of small rural communities. He recalls his days in village schools and friendships with local children with considerable affection. The family was a close and happy one, and frequent visits from relatives and neighboring ministers created a busy and lively atmosphere in the vicarage. Every aspect of daily life in the vicarage was molded by religion. Prayers were said in the morning, evening, and at mealtimes, and from an early age Armin was actively involved in the church itself, not only attending services, but acting as a bell ringer and as an organ pumper on Sundays. Within the family, church holidays such as Reformation Day were important staging posts of the year. Armin's confirmation and the course of preparatory lessons which preceded it marked an important rite of passage in the boy's early life. In later life, he looked back on the vicarage and its values, the emphasis on duty, positive action, and putting Christian virtues into practice in daily life as being a lasting influence on his ideas and outlook. Religion was not, however, the only important influence on Armin's social and psychological development. From an early age, he took a particular interest in history, and his ideas about Germany and its place in the world were formed in his early childhood. The events of the Great War and the injustice of its outcome was something of which Armin was aware from his earliest years at school. In particular, he knew about and was proud of the medals which his own father had gained for service in that conflict. Two events at school played a particular part in developing Armin's sympathy with nationalistic sentiments. The first was a visit from a participant in the sea battle outside Skagerrak, who had survived the famous sinking of the cruiser Frauenlob. This inspired in the young Armin an ambition to join the Navy, perhaps as a U-boat officer. The second was the performance of the plays Wallenstein and Egmont by Goethe, which awoke in Armin a strong admiration for military valor and an interest in the heroic ideal. These impressions were strengthened by other nationalistic influences in the environment. A series of images from German history on cigarette cards made a particular impression on his imagination, as did the books detailing subjects such as the history of Germany's lost colonies, which he received as school prizes. Even as a boy, Armin had developed the conviction a career in the armed forces would be the most honorable part of his citizenship. In a later years, political development, as well as the general nationalistic tone of the period, began to have an impact on Armin's family. In 1931, Armin's parents joined the NSDAP. As Protestants, they were attracted to the Nazi appeal to positive Christianity. This appealed to their perception that the Augsburg Confession was inextricably linked to the idea of German national identity. Armin's uncle, who was also his godfather, was even more politically engaged. He fled to Reich following the failure of the July Putsch of 1934 and was a member of the Austrian Legion. Armin himself was a member of the Hitler Youth, serving as a banner bearer and later as treasurer. From 1934, however, the family found itself swimming increasingly against the political tide. As Nazi control of the church grew, and as their intrusion into doctrinal questions increased, their insistence, for example, that the Old Testament was a tainted Jewish text, which could not be taught in church, Armin's father felt compelled to join the Bekennende Kirche movement, which opposed the Nazi-inspired Deutsche influence with its church. Although never expelled from the party, Armin's father was subjected to hostile interrogations on a number of occasions. Faced with a distrust of the church hierarchy, and even of members of his own congregation in Thuringia, Armin's father felt compelled to seek a position in Austria. Yet members of the Protestant church in Austria felt suspicious of a man returning from the church in the homeland. It was only with some difficulty that his father found a new position, and even then it was as an assistant minister. A demotion which was not only painful to his feelings, but which also entailed a significant deterioration in the financial circumstances of his family. As a young man, Armin was only dimly aware of the political difficulties. However, after the move to Stockholm, which occurred shortly before the outbreak of war, Armin had two experiences which led him into some discomfort with the political tone. He was taken to a demonstration against the assassination of von Rath by his school teachers. While there, he witnessed a group of demonstrators jostling and taunting some Jews who were present. A family friend who saw Armin and his classmates at the demonstration reproached him for taking part in this harassment, a charge which left him feeling uncomfortable. In 1939, while he was boarding with a family in Sonneberg, he and a group of friends were arrested and held in the police station overnight. The youths had no idea why they had been apprehended, but in the morning were told the reason. They should not have been wandering the streets, because the Gauleiter was due in town that day. The boys were completely unaware of the proposed visit. These two incidents left Armin with a strong sense of injustice. Despite these negative experiences, Armin was nevertheless keen to join the army as soon as he left school in 1941. Indeed, such was his yearning for military glory that his chief response on hearing the news of the fall of Paris was to fear that the war might be over before he had an opportunity to take part. The stories of heroism in which he had been reared led him to believe that the noblest profession to follow would be that of an infantry officer. His own father had been an army officer, and he felt that this type of combat was more authentic and heroic than that found in the other forces. To him, the life of
Oh,
an
you level
officer
51? Yeah,
represented
we're just gonna
values
make you level
similar to those
37,
of the
so
church.
it's painful.
Duty
Also, I
to
can't just
father,
like fly through these
a
quests real
commitment
fast.
to
No, we're
order
just making
and
this real painful
decency
for
in
you.
society,
Oh, do the
care
items
and
adapt to my level?
responsibility
No,
for
there's still
support.
level 37 items.
In
Fuck you.
retrospect, he also suspects that he knew that a career in the army would keep him at arm's length from the political authorities, who had caused so many problems for his family. Upon receiving his call-up papers in July, he therefore left willingly and with some enthusiasm. His only anxiety was that the war might frustrate his plans to marry his childhood sweetheart, Hertha, as the couple had planned during his last summer in Stockerau. Part 1. Training. 1. August 1941 to June 1950. Call up and training. Age 17 years. Called up for basic training. Age 18 years. Training complete. On 1st August 1941, I had to be in the Jaeger barracks
I really shouldn't be struggling this much.
If the word Westmark had not been added, I would not have had even a vague idea as to where my destination was. Westmark was the name given to that region which had been added on to the Reich after the surrender of France. Whether that included only the former German Alsace and Lorraine, or more, no one knew. In any event, I had to seek the aid of a large-scale map to find St. Avold, which I finally discovered lay between Saarbrücken and Metz in Lorraine. 1st August was not her normal call-up deadline. The normal dates were 1st April and 1st October. It turned out that there were in fact only a few of us younger on 1st August 1940, in accordance with our call-up order. In the meantime, Mum was in the Lisa Tower with Ruby and Lisa, so I went to where they were staying in Labing Post, the Brücken. The 31st July, they had planned to trip out to the parsonage of Eisenstadt to visit the family of Parsonage Schimmel, a school friend of Father's. From there, I began my journey on the regular afternoon post. The journey was first as far as Bickle on the ground, and from there by road by the tunnel. During the night we crossed southern Bickle to Saarbrücken, where I left the expressway to get on an ordinary passenger train going towards Metz. On the platform, I met a boy who was looking around just as I was. He was dragging along 2 big suitcases. I spoke to him, and it turned out that we were both going to the same place. He was Ludwig Wigel Popovsky, the son of a Vienna tram driver. In him, I had found my first comrade. We remained close through 2 years, more or less. Neither of us knew or had any explanation why we had ended up in that particular district. We also knew nothing about the unit to which we had been assigned, namely the 2nd Company of Infantry Ersatz Battalion 7, nor from which part of the country its members came. Wigel, like me, had left it up to chance as to what infantry unit he would be assigned. The mystery was resolved shortly after we arrived. First, after getting out of St. Avold station, we had to lug our heavy luggage 2 kilometers over a mountain, behind which lay the little town. At the edge of it was the Jaeger barracks. We arrived at about 2:30 p.m. Although we were not yet soldiers, we had nevertheless to experience for ourselves the truth of the saying that half his life the soldier has to wait in vain. There are certainly good reasons for that. At 3 p.m., however, to a certain extent, there began the new and serious part of my life. It turned out that altogether there were 4 of us soldiers who had been provisionally accepted with offers of gambling. Most were from Lower Silesia. One came from the Ruhr, 2 from Trautenau in Lower Bohemia, 2 of us, Popovsky and I came from Vienna and the Vienna area. The battalion station in St. Avold was the Ersatz unit 7, in peacetime based in Weizsäcker. We found out that the entire Silesian Ersatz Army Corps had been moved into the Westmark. In the French campaign, Regiment 7 had been commanded by a colonel. At that time, replaced the commander of the regiment with a strength of almost a battalion. It was the case right up to the end of the war that in almost every company I came across, there was at least one being Boros. For my part, I often regretted that I had made no attempt to join a unit from my homeland. Before I became a soldier, I had given outstanding in the victory parade for the returning troops. But later, I regret because I had no close wartime comrades within their bounds. That became clear to me when eventually I sat in the Linz Regional High Court with my colleague Zana. They had been in the Linz Division, the 45th. Zana was among the men of the Linz Infantry Regiment, the sons of the region and of the city, who marched on to war from the castle. Hermann Sperner had been an artillery officer in the division. Immediately after installation, under the suggestion inside the barrack room of the bed and obtaining items of military uniform and equipment, there began the rigorous service involved in basic training. It lasted 6 weeks. It turned out that this too had been a kind of test. Of the 17 of us who had joined on 1st August, 6 were dismissed because they did not meet requirements. Because they were not yet of age for military service, they were sent back home. You could easily imagine with what mockery they would be welcomed back to school by their classmates who had stayed behind after their experience of a holiday that brought so much trouble. So, 11 of us remained together. Our service went on, apart from the normal work of the barracks, under the supervision of a lieutenant, an NCO, and a Gefreiter, who at the same time was senior soldier in the barrack room. The 11 of us were Hans Altermann from Göttesberg in Silesia, Walter Bormann from Breslau, Walter Henschel from Reichenbach in the Olengebirge, Hans Berndt and Gottfried Bergmann from Leibniz, Jochen Fiedler from Glogau, Diesel and Helmut Überler from Trautnau, Pohlmann from Wuppertal, together with Popovsky and me. Since Popovsky had a camera with him, I have some photos of it. The first shows us in a group on the parade ground. We are wearing field service jackets with our top collar button undone, our belts buckled, army boots, and the forage field service caps on our heads. My hands are still stuck into my trouser pockets in a quite unmilitary fashion. After basic training was over, we moved to Merchingen, halfway between Metz and Saarbrücken. The place mostly consisted of barracks built after 1871, after Alsace-Lorraine had been Württemberg. Here was the start of Elsace-Lorraine 28, to which the 2 infantry regiments, 350 and 461, belonged. From then on, our group was part of the 2nd Company, Infanterie Ersatzbataillon 350. I scarcely have any recollections of St. Avold, because at the time, during basic training, you were not allowed to leave the barracks. I can only remember one single trip out that we used to find a photographer's studio. I recall Merchingen as the place where all our training took place, carried out on the parade ground and on the firing range. Certainly in St. Avold we drilled on the parade ground and first practiced with our weapons. That was only a little compared with the variety of the drill to which we were then subjected. The training regulations for the infantry, AVI, Army Service Regulations, HDV 130/2A, for Schützenkompanie, was the Bible according to which our life as soldiers then proceeded. From the individual training, I shall quote the following. Concerning the basic
Day 43. Amy continues her antisocial behavior. Rex exhibits force sensitivity and asserts his dominance over the pack. Pardon me, my lord. Sometimes I lose my head in my work. I'm Dr. Weiland, xenobiologist specializing in raccoon behavior.
What have you discovered?
The last week alone has produced incredible insight. Raccoons are pack hunters, led by alpha hunters. Socioeconomic status prior to infection has no bearing on their place in the herd. These alpha hunters are magnificent, fierce warriors. Without them, the pack is lost.
Cut down these alphas and the monsters will bow to a new master.
A wise perspective, my lord. With the raccoon leaders dead, the next step is simple. You see, raccoons possess incredible olfactory strength. I've engineered an alarm pheromone that piques their fury. Simply release these pheromones in the Rakul warrens, and the frenzied, leaderless beasts will sate their bloodlust on the nearby Republic outpost.
Consider it done.
Science thanks you. Remember, first assassinate the Alpha leaders, then release these pheromones. That's all the encouragement the Rakuls need.
One. The soldier's good bearing is an index of his training and overall physical education. It is to be improved whenever everyday service provides the opportunity. 2. Standing without weapon to attention. In the basic position, the man stands still. The feet stand with the heels close together. The toes are placed as far apart as to position the feet at not quite a right angle to each other. The weight of the body rests at the same time on the heels and on the balls of both feet. The knees are slightly straight. The upper body is held erect, the chest slightly pushed forward. The shoulders are at an equal level. They are not drawn up. The arms are stretched gently downward, the elbows pressed moderately forward. The hand touches the upper thigh with fingertips and wrist. The fingers are together. The middle finger lies on the trouser seam, the thumb along the index finger on the inside of the hand. The head is held erect, the chin a little drawn back into the neck. The eyes are directed straight ahead. The muscles are easy, and at the same time, convulsive overtension of muscles leads to a poor and forced turn. 3. Should there be heard the cautionary part of a word of command, the call of a superior, or the commands "Achtung." Without these being preceded by "Attention," the man, of course, remains still. 4. Stand at ease. The left foot is moved forward. The man may move, but not speak without permission. We had the old Kar-98 rifle. Rifle training was followed by training on the light machine gun, LMG, the OA pistol, the machine pistol, the hand grenade, and the anti-tank rifle. All that followed by the infantryman's training in combat and field service, and training in post-service training. No less important was training in the section, the smallest unit, which consisted of a section leader and 9 men. The section leader is leader and first of his section into battle. He is responsible for 1. Carrying out his combat tasks, 2. Direction of the light machine gun fire, and as far as combat allows, the rifle use. 3. Ensuring that the weapons, ammunition, and equipment of his section are ready for combat and are at full strength. Section training also included the section's method of combat, its behavior under fire, working its way forward, penetration, taking and holding position, withdrawing, as well as the group being on reconnaissance service and picket duty. HDV 130/2A, of course, also covered training in the platoon and in the company. All that was contained in 670 points. Infantry officer training, however, not only required the knowledge necessary to command a section, a platoon or a company, but also knowledge of the so-called heavy infantry weapons. That is, the heavy machine gun, the heavy mortar, the light and heavy infantry guns, and the anti-tank gun. It covered training in horse riding and driving, the latter including driving both horse-drawn and motorized vehicles. By listing the materials, it can be seen that this meant most of our service time in the training. We began with simply moving around the ground in the respective formation, then to march training in formations of different, slowly increasing lengths, and finally, firing practice. All that was preceded by a thorough process of training in firing positions. I proved to be a good shot. I soon found out that my vision in my right eye was not as sharp as that in my left. The eye test we had when we mustered had been a cursory one. It was only much later that I became aware that I had with a clear decrease in visual sharpness of my right eye as against. Meanwhile, after I had successfully tried shooting bare-handed, I stumbled and achieved excellent results. At the exercises at 100-meter range, standing offhand, and 200-meter range, lying offhand, I managed to score 30 and 55 respectively, and thus was in the narrow range, leading the group. Firing practice, and the marches that regularly took place on Saturday stood out from the drill on the parade ground. Firing practice involved bodily relaxation, marches involved particular bodily exertion. If on the first march, which lasted an hour, we covered only 5 kilometers, within a few weeks that was increased in 10-kilometer increments to 55 kilometers. It all led to the very edge of exhaustion. As proper infantrymen, on the marches we wore foot cloths instead of socks, and before the march we smeared our feet with deer tallow so that, provided our boots fitted, blisters or sores hardly ever occurred. Only once did I get so-called pressure points, that is, blisters under the hard skin. They were extremely painful, but at least entitled me to sit up on a horse-drawn vehicle that followed behind us. Everyday life in the barracks began with reveille, soon followed by the duty NCO's UVD call. Those detailed to fetch coffee, step out. Before work began, 1.5 hours after reveille, morning washing had to be done, beds had to be made expertly, and lockers tidied up. Inside work included cleaning weapons and cleaning barrack gloves. The weekly hour of polishing and patching also took place as part of the daily boot cleaning and occasional uniform cleaning sessions.
I killed the
We
Ragdoll
pressed the
leaders
trousers
and
of
released
our
the
walking
Theranor.
out uniform.
Pack reacted violently, just as you expected.
I knew it. With my hypothesis validated, our relationship with Rakuls... I mustn't get ahead of myself. This requires further study. Your assistance has proven invaluable, my lord. My findings will reflect your influence.
Valhoon's dead, just like the rest of his squad. I thought you should know.
He's really dead? That's the best medicine I could ask for. I admit, I didn't think it was possible. I'm sorry I ever doubted you.
They were a threat, so I dealt with them accordingly.
I'm sorry I had to ask you to deal with my mess. But Valhoon's death is worth it.
Sergeant, there's a Colto tank available now.
I'm sorry to cut this short, but it sounds like I need to go. Thank you.
My lord, the probes have returned. The data is coming through now. What is that?
It's a hangar, you twit. Just keep monitoring it and notify me if anything, even an insect, flies out. I do hope I'm not the only competent Sith on this planet. The Republic is amassing a fleet, and I need someone capable to step in.
It sounds as though you already knew the hangar was there.
Foresight is but one of my many qualities. I've gleaned more from simple intuition than from these myopic fools. The recent increase in carrier activity led me to suspect the Republic was stockpiling a secret hangar of sorts. As always, I was right. The hangar itself is still under construction, but the fleet they've assembled easily dwarfs our own.
I'll just assume you're kidding.
Even I couldn't have predicted they'd build it so close. It's the rare insect that hides under a boot. An orbital bombardment ought to reduce that hangar to dust. But first, my fleet will need the hangar's exact coordinates.
This team can plant beacons in the hangar's vicinity, and our ships will destroy the Republic's greatest secret weapon in a single rain of fire. Brilliant, my lord.
Time for you to see what a Sith can do.
The Republic knows the hangar is vulnerable, so they'll be prepared. Just storm past their defenses and plant those beacons. By the time they realize what you were up to, we'll already be raining fire upon them.
By laying them overnight between the sheet and the straw mattress. In addition to the field uniform and drill clothing, every man also possessed a walking-out uniform. It was called sarasani, because in actual fact it looked by no means smart but resembled circus dress. While the field uniform was made of single coarse cloth of a green-grey-brown colour, the walking-out uniform had two different kinds of grey cloth. The jacket was vaguely green, but the trousers were more of a blue tinge. The collar was dark green. The collar patches and those on the forearms were of silver braid trimming.
Come again.
To that was added the field service cap, and best of all, the white braid, which was the colour of the infantry arm of the service. Apart from its smart and clean appearance, this colour always seemed to me to express the innocence and unpretentiousness for which the infantry was praised. Other colours used were the red of the artillery, the green of the Gebirgsjäger, the black of the pioneers, the blue of the medical units, the bright blue of the panzer units, the citrus yellow of the signals units, the dark yellow of the cavalry and later reconnaissance troops, and the violet of the military chaplains. But none of them could compare with our pure white. Outside training mainly took place on the large garrison training ground. However, especially for marching, we switched to the friendly hilly countryside near to or further away from Mörchingen. Once we were resting near a large plum orchard that was far away from any village. It gave the Leutnant the idea that we should take cover there and stuff our bellies. Some time later, before the wine harvest, our march took us past a field that was planted with vines. Here, too, the Leutnant let us take cover between the furrows. As we see in old pictures of a land of milk and honey, we lay on our backs between two furrows, reaching for the nearly ripe grapes hanging over us, and contentedly ate our. The most pleasant activity, because it was completely different from all the others, we had on Wednesday. Then, from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., there was riding, and from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., driving. In our riding training, each one of us had his own horse. Mine was the mare Orange. Everyone had to keep a piece of bread from his rations for the horse to win its trust and to be able to reward it. We learned not to approach the animal from the rear and how to bridle and saddle it. We also had to muck out the stalls and brush the horses. During the course of that training, we learned the paces of the horse, the walk, trot, and gallop, and how to control the horse. Finally, in the riding arena, we jumped modest obstacles and performed exercises on horseback. Riding outside was more satisfying than strenuous, especially when after our first few hours of riding our behinds were not burning. Once I must have irritated Orange because she bolted with me on the training ground. She slipped into a raging gallop and I could not hold her. After all, Mr. Killian wished me to calm down, but evidently wanted to vex me some more because she stopped abruptly in her tracks. I had to summon up all my strength not to fly out of the saddle, which is certainly what she intended. The driving instruction passed off without such difficulties. To drive a horse-drawn vehicle was something we learned in an afternoon, but instruction in driving motor vehicles stretched out over several months, as well as a thorough theoretical and technical training taken with the aid of an Army service regulation book. A lot of time was spent on the driving itself. We rode motorcycles with sidecars, and drove a medium-weight two-wheeler. On 18th January 1942, that is a few days after my 18th birthday, we received our Wehrmacht riding orders. On Wednesday evening, in the offices, there were gentlemen's evenings. We officer cadets in our walking-out uniforms, of course, had to take part. Before dinner, you would stand about aimlessly in the side rooms of the dining hall. Then the commander of the Ersatz regiment would invite us to take our places. On the first occasion, we were understandably somewhat awkward and almost stood in ranks. That led a doctor, whom I later got to know as a very clever man, with a sarcastic remark, "Ah, the gentlemen have turned out a spot." We did not always sit together at the end of the table, but were placed individually between officers, and thus had to take part in their conversation. If I had not already learned at home how to behave at table, I would have been taught it there. It is true that I had not learned at home that you had on occasion to manage with only 40 centimeters space at the table. That had to be done on Christmas Eve, when the wives of the married officers were invited to dine with us, and space wasn't plenty at the table. On those occasions, and also on the gentlemen's evening, music was supplied by a palm-court orchestra composed of members of the regimental music corps. It was frowned upon to speak of service matters. That was strictly avoided. On the gentlemen's evenings, we were allowed out for longer. We were allowed to stay out after the general lights out. I found permission. The food in the officers' mess was not better than that in the barracks canteen, but cooked separately. An exception was made at Christmas and New Year, when everyone got a portion of calf or tin. But in addition, there were also bratwürsten, or brockwurst, that assuaged our hunger, and together with a potato salad laid down a good basis for the wine. In the Mörchingen officers' mess, we supplied splendid drinks. It was there that I drank my serve, white and red, Bordeaux and Burgundy. In St. Avold, there had often been air raid warnings that mostly lasted from midnight until the enemy aircraft had left the area of the Reich. For that reason, duties were assigned in such a way that after Reveille at 4:30 a.m., they began at 6 a.m. After the meal set for 10:30 a.m., the lunch break lasted until 2 p.m., so that everyone could catch up the sleep they had lost during the night. There were none of those annoying disturbances. Once, in the autumn, we went to Strasbourg and saw the sights of that beautiful city, by then once again in Germany. On the platform of the Minster, from where you got the wide view eastwards into the Black Forest and westwards into the Vosges, Ludwig Popovsky took our photograph. At that time, he had attached himself to Helmut Überler from Trautner. I had become friendly with Hans Altermann from Göttesberg in the Reisenberg. From Altermann, I have a written testimony to our friendship, which he wrote to me in a little book, Novellen aus Metz, which each of us had received from a regimental commander as a Christmas present. Either we shall meet in victory, or never again. The young man had prophetically. A year later, when he passed out of the war, of us 11 comrades, there only remained Henschel, Popovsky, and I. Fiedler wanted to become an officer of engineers. I later chanced to meet him on Leitner Station as a Panzerleutnant. I met Bormann about the same time, spring of 1944, in Mährische Schönwald. In the summer of 1942, he had a stiff knee, and, without attending War College, had, after a long delay, become an officer. Of the others, I never heard anything more. As far as my friend Hans Altermann is concerned, I am sure that he was killed in action as early as 1942. It is time that I described our instructors, who no doubt had been selected for that duty. The Gefreiter and senior soldier in our block, Herbert Kreckler, was a candidate for NCO, a small blond young man from a Silesian village. His place was shortly afterwards taken by Obergefreiter Walle. I met Kreckler in the summer of 1942 at Upolossi, when we were both already NCOs and could call each other by the familiar "du." A few days later, he was killed in action. Walle was getting on his 30s, and judged by his appearance and behavior, came from a town. The NCO, August Gale, during the French campaign, had suffered a fractured pelvis from a falling tree. Like Walle, he was a patient, self-controlled instructor who never lost his temper. He carried out his duties in an exemplary manner. Lieutenant Riedel came from Bad Reinitz, in the county of Glatz. He was, as he would proudly relate, the son of a worker, and had joined the army after leaving school. He was extraordinarily agile and intelligent. Like Gale, he was a fair-minded superior officer who showed preference to no one and provided us with a thorough training. He, too, gave each of us a little book for Christmas. I corresponded later with Riedel, but do not know what became of him, or of Gale and Walle. Once, when I was suffering from bad toothache, I had to visit Riedel in his room before morning duties to wake him and knock him up to ask permission to be allowed to go on sick parade to the dentist. I was not sure how he would react to being disturbed, and was pleasantly surprised when he gave me permission without question. The two photographs of our Christmas in barracks show us 11 officer cadets with Obergefreiter Wahler in our Sarasani jackets. In front of the Christmas tree in the background, there on the left, some lockers against the wall in front of them of bunk. In the foreground is the long table. In the second photograph, we're sitting with our tunics on. In front of the darkened windows, the big tree decorated with lametta and a burning candle. On the ceiling is hanging the big Advent wreath, and on the table, too, some lights are still burning. In front, on the left, sits Popovsky, beside him, Alterman. On the right, opposite him, Ibel. And in front of him is me, with a reflective, questioning expression. Better than all the service regulations intended for training, instruction, and individual study was the Reibert. It was named after its author, Dr. Ur W. Reibert, Hauptmann and company commander. A 300-page compendium, it was entitled Der Dienstunterricht im Heer, that is, service instruction in the army. We used the green-bound edition for the men of the Schützen Company. The Reibert was an excellent systematic compendium of all the training material. As well as the introduction for service instruction, it was divided into the sections Patriotism, the soldier's profession and its duties, sense of duty, behavior of the soldier, the army, anti-gas defense, close-range weapons, weapons and equipment, drill, firing, together with duties in the field and combat. In addition to the oath on the colors, the words of which everyone had to know and repeat as he was sworn in, there were the duties of the German soldier, about which Reibert states, "The German soldier is expected to know the following articles by heart and word for word." They read, 1. The Wehrmacht bears arms for the German folk. It protects the German Reich and fatherland, the folk bound into one in National Socialism and its living space. The roots of its power lie in a glorious past, in German Volkstum, German soil, and German labor. Service in the Wehrmacht is a service of honor to the German folk. 2. The honor of the soldier lies in the full and unconditional offering of his person for folk and fatherland, even unto sacrificing his life. 3. The highest virtue of the soldier is aggressive courage. This demands toughness and resolve. Cowardice is a disgrace. Hesitation is unsoldierlike. 4. Obedience is the foundation of the Wehrmacht. Trust the foundation of obedience. Soldierly leadership rests on delight in taking responsibility, on superior ability, and tireless care. 5. Great achievements in war and peace can only come about in the unshakable fighting community of leader and troops. 6. Fighting community demands comradeship. Comradeship is particularly
Perfect. The beacons are feeding the hangar's coordinates to my ships as we speak. Once the fleet is in position, we can commence the bombardment and turn that hangar into a smoldering crater.
I'll keep an eye out for the explosions.
Please do. It will be quite the spectacle. All ships are in position. Stand by for orbital assault. Excellent work out there. I doubt I could have done a better job of it myself. My master is as generous as he is wise. Colonel Sarab will have your reward waiting for you when you return.
That sounds more than sufficient.
Farewell, then.
proven in need and danger. 7. Self-possessed and yet modest, upright and true, God-fearing and truthful, discreet and incorruptible. The soldier should be to the entire folk a model of manly strength. Only achievements justify pride. 8. His greatest reward and greatest happiness is found by the soldier in the consciousness of duty joyfully fulfilled. Character and achievement are the hallmarks of his way and of his worth. Those duties hark back in their essentials to the Imperial Army, and probably to still older regulations. Millions of soldiers in both world wars modeled themselves on those regulations. In the Second World War, soldiers followed their guidelines right to the bitter end. For those born after those wars, it is hard to comprehend. But for me and my comrades, who willingly submitted ourselves to those duties with all the idealism of youth, they were a kind of profession of faith. To give an example of the sterling quality and thoroughness of the Reibert, I will quote from the general principles of the barracks, room, and locker regulations. Anyone who shouts, howls, and engages in tussles in quarters offends against discipline and order. Decorous singing is permitted if barrack block comrades agree. Popular songs, hackneyed old hits, and songs of an obscene nature are not a suitable part of a soldier's singing repertoire. In the barrack block, that is, the soldier's home, scrupulous order and cleanliness is to be paramount at all times. The tone adopted among the block inmates should be comradely, so that they can get along well with each other. Lunch is a communal meal both because of technical necessity, for reasons of military order, and to cultivate comradeship. For meals, the soldier will appear with clean hands, clean fingernails, and with his hair combed. At table he will sit upright, will not unnecessarily rattle about with the crockery, will be decorous, and refrain from unsuitable chatter. There are many other examples that could be added. However, it may become clear why in our day the Wehrmacht was spoken of as the school of the nation. In that school, even the simple man of the people learned a lot that he had not learned from either his parents or his teachers. At the end of 1986, 45 years on, when I read the letters that I wrote to my family from St. Avold and Mörchingen during the first period as a soldier, I was astonished by the dispassion and distance with which I regarded the business of the army, although I was right in the middle of it. In all conscience, I had shrugged everything off. To have to learn hard lessons, to go through troubles and exertions, to have the occasional moments of harassment, had never become too much for me. In any event, neither I nor my officer-cadet comrades had ever been reduced to tears. That was something about which the regimental commander had once asked at the gentleman's evening. He no doubt was speaking from personal experience, as he thought of his own time as a cadet. Certainly the cadets of the Imperial Army about whom such stories were told had been much younger. For them, the seriousness of military life had begun when they were only 10 years old. In my first letter to my mother and sisters, I complained that we have really very little time, and that we officer cadets were given the most impossible things to do. Thus, for instance, would you believe it, I had been ordered by the UVD to darn his leather gloves. Nevertheless, I completed it to his total satisfaction. On 4th August 1941, I had to travel to Metz to the Reserve Military Hospital for a specialist medical examination of my heart. At my recruitment medical, the unit MO diagnosed a serious defect. In Metz, it proved, thank God, to be a completely wrong diagnosis. Otherwise, I would have been sent home, which would have been a big disappointment. After only 10 days, we were having firing practice for the first time. Then was our swearing in, a ceremonial occasion. In the afternoon, we had no duties, and we had our first trip out. It is true, with our NCO and Obergefreiter, but it was quite nice. We gorged ourselves at a confectioner's. For once at least we were full again, otherwise we are always hungry. Yesterday we got our pay books and identity tags. To Father, I reported on 25th August that today we had been flushed out, quick-marched with machine gun and gas mask, and then over the 2.5-meter-high scaling wall. But still, I don't let it get me down, you needn't worry. In the group, there's a lot to laugh about, and you get through everything much easier with humor than with idealism. On 4th September, I told Mother of a stay in sick quarters. The cause was angina, from which I had suffered a lot in my youth. In that letter, I was longing for my school days, but in the next sentence went on that we all really think that we've never had any other life than the one we have now in the military. Our time as civilians is only a beautiful dream. For all that, we're happy and contented. In a letter of 18th September to my mother, I reported that in the last 2 days we've had no rest at all at night. The day before yesterday we had night exercises until 12:30 a.m., then straight into the air raid shelter until 2:30 a.m. Yesterday was gentleman's evening again, very jolly, then air raid shelter again until 2 a.m. A gentleman's evening like that, I said, was as good as a rest, despite the tightness of space, especially the tightness of my tunic. I sat at the table with the colonel, but fortunately he left about 10 p.m. Then things got going. You get used to drinking. Today I can feel no ill effects at all. At the beginning of October, the recruits arrived who were born in 1922. They had been called up normally. For us officer cadets who had the so-called inspection behind us, it meant that we had reached the lowest rung on the military ladder. We were assigned as block seniors, and during the morning served as assistant instructors. My 9 men, all but 2, were Silesian farm lads. In my letter of 18th October, I answered Mother's question as to how I was feeling to be block senior. It was very nice, I said. The work was quiet, and we didn't have to do any more lousy jobs. On the other hand, we didn't have any more free time for ourselves, particularly because we needed to attend the officers' mess very often. We had to go to the gentleman's evening there 3 evenings a week, as well as having to have lunch there on Saturdays and Sundays. At another level, that made a change. Among the older officers who frequented the mess was the leading baritone of the Breslau Opera. The Palm Court Orchestra that sometimes played in the evenings was conducted by the opera's first violin. At the end of October, I told Mother and Rudy of my success in pistol shooting, that our training work was indeed easier, but not our other work. Part of that meant we had to run the obstacle course with the heavy machine gun, the mortar, and each of us carrying 50 pounds weight. I also told them about essay subjects. We had to write the essays in the evenings we were not at the officers' mess. The theme, "Loyalty is the very marrow of honor," is something I could still write about today. Unlike the question, why must Russia lose the war? I give an account of the swearing-in of the recruits as a ceremonial occasion in which the Regimental Music Corps participated. They played, among other things, the chorale "Wir treten zum Beten vor Gott den Gerechten." We come to pray before God, the Just One, the so-called Dutch prayer of thanks. In a letter of 30th October to Liesel, who was 7 at the time, I wrote that snow had fallen overnight, but that I was sorry I couldn't go sledging with her. But on the other hand, had to be glad if no one was going sledging with me. I do not remember whether at the time we actually suffered from hunger, even if I often wrote about hunger and tiredness. But it was no wonder. The unaccustomed physical strains reached the very limits of what we could tolerate. Others, thank God not me, experienced symptoms of exhaustion such as nosebleeds. The comradeship among us 11 was good, even if at first we 2 Austrians and the 2 Sudeten Germans did not feel really very comfortable together. That was why I wrote with delight, and now and then I meet a fellow countryman, such as a man from Weidhofen who had studied with our Professor Richter. By the middle of January 1942, we had completed the first stage of our training, and after a successful inspection, we were promoted to Gefreiter. Then, too, came the longed-for leave, during which an event occurred that threatened to derail my plans. Literally, overnight, I got severe pains in the region of my appendix, which required that I was admitted immediately into the Stockerau Civilian Hospital. In the middle of the night, the consultant had to be fetched. After palpating my abdomen, to no little horror on my part, he uttered the words, "It's too late." In fact, the appendix had perforated, but an infection had developed which had to be cured before there was any question of an operation. I had to remain in hospital for some weeks. On the day after I was admitted, I was laid down in a small room. The only other patient there I recognized as my schoolmate, Ewald Henk. A few days previously, I had found out from Hertha, he had attempted suicide because of an unhappy love affair. The object of his affections was Mausi Grünschober, A really striking girl who, however, had not yielded to his advances. Standing in front of a mirror in order to give particularly drastic form and experience to the scene, Ewald shot himself through the body with a 6.35mm Flaubert rifle. But he had set the barrel muzzle too low, with the result that he shot himself in the left lung and spleen. After the shot, he dropped the rifle and staggered, wailing into the family living room where he cried, "Help me! I have shot myself!" My great worry was that the ill-timed appendix would throw me completely off course or else delay my training. Only at the end of March did I arrive back with mixed feelings in Möchingen, just in time to be able to spend a few days with my comrades before they left for the field. A farewell photo shows us on the steps in front of a door in the barracks building, crowding around our Lieutenant Riedel, our NCO Gehler, and Obergefreiter Wahle. For the farewell, which meant the end of our period of training, we received presents from the Lieutenant. For me, he had selected a small volume of poetry, Folk Forgot. This showed that he had not only recognized the religious bent instilled in me by my parents, but that he also admired it. The dedication harked back to the hard period of training and also contained a maxim for my future. Dear Scheidebauer, life brings us many hardships, but it is only in these that we show our strength. We overcome. We never give up. The reward will be ours. The little book contains Gebet in höchster Not, a prayer when things are at their worst, by Ricarda Huch, Gebet der Knechte und Mägde, a prayer of the lads and lasses by Richard Billinger, Die innere Gestalt, a prayer, the inner form, by Josef Weinheber, Geistliches Lied, a song of the spirit by Hermann Claudius, Zur Flucht, a refuge by Ina Seidel, Our Segen des Deutschen Bauern, the
You return triumphant. You have fought and bled alongside my legionnaires, and I welcome you back as one of our own.
It was an honor to fight alongside your men, Colonel.
The honor was entirely ours. My lord was impressed. Neither his praise nor his rewards come lightly. Revel in the rewards of Lord Vargo, and know that you will always be welcome among the ranks of the 75th.
I expect a call next time you're on leave.
I shall keep that in mind. Farewell.
Looks as if we have two new travelers. The ghost and a little Jedi pet. Wonderful. The pirate thinks he has another ghost story for us to investigate, too.
My lord, it's Carl, your apprentice. Corin's here with me. We don't have much time to talk. Thanaton tried to make us his. Claimed you were dead. We managed to flee Drummond Cast, but his lords have been hounding us through every sector.
Where are you now?
We've set a course for Quesh, a nasty little swamp world. The warfare on the planet should allow us to hide from Thanaton. We need your help. We took something from Thanaton, something to help you beat him. Blast! Ship's hit! Emergency landing on Quesh! Hurry!
If Thanaton kills your apprentices, he will appear very weak indeed. It looks like hunting ghosts will have to wait.
Daga ay wisandans ni namans for isis bi jandans amin. Say galut saida iswis us uf bandan ja atnam in puidangarja.
I wonder what it's an omen of.
Ja iswis iskut ndem iswil imb. How saip, say uren sa sayans, du sayan fraua.
I wouldn't trust every stray thought that enters your mind, especially with Zash in there.
Papanu gasavans, lo anes, pose us tauhana. Patay guibanist, ni fragais fraujan, kupainana. Us taupaim, I CJ in alam is frumadine habans.
No, this isn't right. What am I doing? I'm not Darkseid. I'm not Sith.
Why is it always light and dark, black and white?
As a Jedi, I've sworn to end this war, even if I have to kill every Sith in the galaxy. There can never be peace in the galaxy as long as the Sith exist. The Sith thrive on endless war.
So let's say you kill all the Sith. The really important ones, at least. What then? You can't kill them all, and the survivors will bicker amongst themselves. Someone will fill the power vacuum. Maybe someone powerful enough to unite the Sith. You might prefer the evil you know.
So what do you propose? How will you change the Empire?
The Empire needs strong, rational leadership. A rational Empire is a peaceful one.
And you think you can provide that? I will not go against the Jedi teachings or my conscience. But I'll do what I can.
I gotta come clean with you, Sith. I wasn't always the scoundrel you met on Tatooine. I used to run in the Republic military. Made captain before I wised up and deserted. Call it misspent youth.
Why are you telling me this now?
Carl sent me a message. I guess bailing him out got the Republic military's attention. Seems they've added treason to the charges of desertion and piracy. Guess they're not big on former officers traveling with a Sith. Anyway, if things get hot, I might need to hop off the radar for a while.
If things get hot, this ship is the safest place for you. The Republic military police are no match for me.
Thanks. Good to know you got my back.
German Farmer's Blessing on His House by Paula Groger and Jochen Kleppers Neujahrslied, a New Year's song. Hermann Steher, Heinrich Zillig, Walter Flex, Bergengruen and Rilke, Agnes Sniegel, and Rudolf Alexander Schröder with his Lobgesang, a song of praise, were among the authors. The last page contained the prophetic dedication of my friend Hans Altermann, that I have already mentioned. Either we shall meet again in victory, or never again. Always your friend,
Lord,
Hans.
It looks like Thanaton's men will catch us
My
before you
comrade's
arrive.
assignment,
Corin and
the
I will
term
try
by
our
which it
best to
was
stay
known to
from
us,
off,
was followed by
but Lord
dreary
Cineratus
weeks
is not a
for
man
me.
to be trifled with.
I was only
The item we stole was the key to a hidden entrance to Darth Thanaton's private meditation chambers. It is the perfect ambush spot for when you have enough power to face him. If Corin and I don't make it, we hope you'll avenge our deaths. Crush Thanaton, and usher in the new era for the Sith.
Here for inoculation. You'll need Form 1423/D. And, oh, excuse me. Sorry, my lord, I thought you were another recruit. No paperwork required. I take it you're here to fight in the Quesh War?
Just point me towards the battle.
This planet generally doesn't inspire excitement. Quesh is highly toxic, poisoned by the resource the Republic's mining. You'll need a protective injection just to survive. There we go. That treatment will protect you for the time being.
The protection wears off.
The effects will fade eventually, but you can receive more treatments planetside. You're cleared. Talk to Moff Drayson if you want to fight. He's in charge of the Empire's war effort.
Miss me, huh? And I thought Hutta smelled bad. I guess it's true there's no good thing the Hutts can't spoil.
At your service, my lord. Travel route is confirmed.
Fit for indoor duties, and was employed as a recruit Gefreiter in the 2nd Company of Infantry, Ersatz Battalion 461, in the neighbouring barracks. The recruits who reported on 1st April were all from the eastern part of Upper Silesia, aged from 30 to 35 years, and were all members of the so-called Volksgruppen 2 and 3. According to that system of classification, which still covered the Reich Germans, Volksgruppe 1, and the Poles, Volksgruppe 4, there were those who professed to be German, or who were still classified as German. 2 of these I can still see. One was a slim, sensitive cobbler Slavic from Ornontovich, near Gleiwitz. The other was a small, black-haired and round-headed Hilfsarbeiter, Stanitzek, from Hindenburg. Slavic used to tell of his craft and how he had made orthopedic footwear, but also had made riding boots for Polish officers. He told us that he had not long been married. He had taken a kind of vow never to take off his wedding ring, and spoke of his marriage in a way that impressed me. But he was killed in Russia when he went into action for the first time. Staniszek was a true Perun. I remember him as a Schweik character. He taught me how to drink 96% proof vodka, that is, trickled onto a sugar cube. I then had more time for myself and went into the officers' mess as I had before. Jochen Fiedler, who had a wireless set, left it behind for me. After 4 weeks, I had to report to the medical officer, and at the beginning of May was sent to the Reserve Military Hospital in Metz. For a few more days, I was under observation.
Come back anytime.
Indoor duties such as peeling potatoes, in comparison with my previous duties, I found demeaning. If they were not on the agenda, we could go out and look around the town. I went for walks in the parks by the Moselle, and even went to a concert. One afternoon, I had been in a coffee house and got into conversation with Wolfgang Schneiderhan, the young leader of the Vienna Philharmonic. That evening, he was playing Beethoven's Violin Concerto. The German cultural life in Metz was mostly provided by artists from Vienna. Later, I found out
Anonymity, deception. These are your tools. Trust no one.
You want to be on top. Gonna need the skills. Come back, you might learn something.
The Empire can't afford another loss, Major. We must crush the Republic immediately.
They've been on quest for years. We can't destroy their entire mining operation overnight.
Gentlemen, we have company. I am Moff Drayson, head of Quesh Imperial Forces. You're here to join our war against the Republic?
Not just join. I'll win it.
This operation's under control. We don't need Sith running wild down here.
Let me remind you of the dark side's power, Major.
Enough. Save it for the Republic. They're responsible for our assignment to this toxic rock. The Republic went digging and found the source of this planet's poison.
The miners call it Quesh venom. Lies just below the planet's surface.
We distill the stuff into quell.
a lethal poison. But the Republic knows how to refine it into high-grade adrenals.
They've been processing the toxins into adrenals for years, with hot help, no less. We've come to conquer their operation and claim Quesh's venom for the Empire.
The Empire wouldn't wage war on this scale just for resources.
Correct. The adrenals are a bonus. Our primary goal is to test the Republic.
Push them enough on Quesh, and the Republic will be provoked into open warfare across the galaxy.
Once they violate the Treaty of Coruscant, the Empire can strike without risking neutral worlds joining in. We must rile their temper.
I have a talent for rousing the Republic's fury.
I can't wait to see you test their restraint. First, we strike the Republic's venom mines.
The venom produces noxious gas. That's why Quesh is so lovely. It's most lethal in the mines, so the Republic installed specialized filters.
Destroy those filters, release the poisonous gas, and the Republic will have to flee the mines.
They'll declare the mines a disaster site when I'm finished.
Take out every weapon emplacement you can, then get inside and destroy the filtration units. Don't stop until the mines are choked with poison.
At that time, people like Josef Meinrad were engaged in the theatre in Metz. On 10th May, I was operated on, and after about a fortnight, discharged back to Möchingen. Of my fellow patients, I remember a Feldwebel who had a sliver of bone from his lower thigh transplanted into his lower arm in order to make the arm more mobile. The Feldwebel was a teacher and had an education to match. He played chess, and so we were able to pass the time playing chess and in conversation. Nevertheless, I was impatient and would not accept my fate. I would much rather be in Russia in the worst muck, as I wrote to Mother. She and Aunt Lottie, she said, had little natural tendency or talent to be mothers of German heroes. However, my letters spoke of little else. There was not even loving raillery, but a few reproaches that she had not written. It was rather a restrained kind of tenderness, with frequent assurances that I was thinking a lot of her and my sisters, and was her thankful son. In one Christmas present, the little book, Wie die Pflicht ist Befehl, as duty commanded, words from our war poets, the editor's foreword states that in this struggle all Germans are animated by a single belief. It is belief in the mission of the Führer, and in the eternal nature of the Reich. There is a single certainty that Germany shall live, even if we must die. To the quotations from works of the war poets Walter Flex, Ernst Junger, Baumelberg and Zöberlein, etc., was added the then well-known poem An die Mütter by a certain Irmgard Grosch. Its last verse runs, "If I fall, Mother, you must bear it, and your pride will overcome your pain, for you were allowed to bring a sacrifice to him when we speak the word Germany." Such proud mourning as displayed in many death announcements at that time would certainly have been beyond my mother. I'm also unable to say how she took the news of the death of my brother. He was killed in action as late as April 1945. But the poem had little effect on me. Naturally, its heroic tone, all the more so in the poetic art form, appealed to me. But the thought that it could be I being mourned like that did not occur to me. I never suffered from premonitions of death, but carried the conviction that it would never happen to me. I was even then looking forward with confidence to the long vortex of the front, and left for the field with a light heart. The Reich was in danger. It was not Germany that had declared war on England and France, but they that had declared war on Germany. But as far as the Soviet Union was concerned, there was no doubt about what the Reich government had written in its declaration of war with the Soviet government. The German folk is conscious that it is called to save the whole civilized world from the deadly dangers of Bolshevism, and to lay the way open for a true process of social advancement in Europe. An extract from the declaration was printed in small print at the upper edge of many sealed documents. Who among us could have doubted the truth of what was said there? Who could have proved it? Part 2. From raw recruit to old hand. 2. July to September 1942. First actions. Join regiment 150 kilometers from Moscow. Officer cadet in action against the Russians. From 15th October 1942, Infantry Regiment 7 was a Grenadier regiment, a unit of the Prussian tradition. It served in the First World War as Grenadier Regiment König Friedrich Wilhelm II, 30th Letters, number 10. After reorganization and reformation, it had participated from 1935 to 1939 as Infantry Regiment 7 in the campaign in Poland.
But I'd lost you there.
In 1939 and 1940, it fought in the campaign in the West. Within the unit of the 28th Infanterie Division, to which it had belonged since the beginning of the war, it was prepared for the attack on the Soviet Union in the Suwałki sector in East Prussia. It served in the following actions in Russia, 1941 to 1942. 22nd to 27th June 1941, breakthrough into the bunker. 29th June to 9th July 1941, Bialystok-Minsk encirclement battle. 10th July to 9th August 1941, advance and fighting in Smolensk. 10th August to 1st October 1941, defensive fighting, the Popki, before and around Yadkin. 2nd to 14th October 1941, the Vyazma. 15th October to 18th November 1941, the regiment was released from the 28th Infanterie Division and placed under the command of the 252nd Infanterie Division. 19th November to 4th December 1941, the attack on Moscow. 5th December 1941 to 15th January 1942, retrograde movements into the Rosa-Stellung and trench fighting. 16th to 25th January 1942, the Winterreise, or the Winter Journey. The term Winterreise ironically echoes the 19th century poet Heinrich Heine's sequence of poems under the same title, and also Franz Schubert's subsequent musical arrangement of Heine's poems. 26th January to 28th February 1942, widespread defensive fighting to the east of Geshatsk. It was in the Geshatsk-Stellung, some 150 kilometers west-southwest of Moscow, that I joined the regiment. On 2nd July in St. Avold, I had begun my journey, which as a straggler, following my comrades, I had to make on my own. The journey passed through Berlin and Warsaw. At first I was in trains carrying men back to the front from Lviv, but from Warsaw to Smolensk, through West Prussia, Kovno, Vilna, Dunaburg, Polotsk, Vitebsk, I was in an empty hospital train. On 4th July, I sent to my mother and sisters very best wishes from the German-Russian frontier. From Vyazma, I wrote on 8th July that I was very impressed by the Russian landscape and by what I had seen on the journey, and that I was hoping to arrive at my unit the day after tomorrow. At last, on 10th July, I wrote my first letter as a sender, with field post number 17638C from the 6th
My lord, Sergeant Molvar. Had a cousin who was Sith. Very powerful. Died young. Wish he was here now. Operation was to move in, secure the area for a supply depot, move troops and equipment deeper into the mines. Casualties, 13. Dead, 12. And I count 6 broken ribs, 1 shattered kneecap, and 1 hut-sized headache.
Fill me in on the situation.
The Republic worms guarding the area were jacked up on some kind of adrenals. They weren't human, they were animals. They shrugged off blaster fire like bug bites and then tore into my squad. I only survived because a grenade knocked me senseless. My plan was to rush in there, take all the adrenals I could find, and complete the mission. But you might have better success. We need that supply depot.
In that case, I'll do it.
Sure. Won't do the rest of my squad any good. But I'll take a lesson. I'll give you the coordinates to the Republic's adrenal stashes. If they can play that game, so can the Empire. Secure the area for the new supply depot, and make sure Alpha Squad didn't die for nothing.
Do you require medical attention? Be well.
Finding Quesh to your liking? It's an acquired locale. My lord, may I suggest sampling what luxuries this planet has to offer while you're here?
Just show me where the fun is.
You can find all the latest adrenal formulas available right here in our civilian markets. But if you're interested in something truly cutting edge, you've heard of the three families? The rebellious Hutts who've chosen to ally with the Republic.
Next to nothing, but I'd like to learn.
The three families broke all ties with the Hutt cartel to corner the market on adrenals. They've allied with the Republic for protection. We intercepted a communication from the three families indicating that they've moved an experimental formula to Attis Station for final testing. Industry rumors about the formula's effects are nothing short of miraculous. Heightened awareness, near immunity to fatigue or exertion, mild euphoria. It's perfect. I want to acquire some samples for synthesis, to distribute it among our troops, after I've tested its safety, of course.
I suppose I can lower myself to do this.
You'll find Attis Station nearby. It's a Republic research facility disguised as a simple outpost, so it'll be better protected than it appears.
Company of Infanterie Regiment 7. From Geschatsk onwards, to which goods trains were travelling, I had to march with my knapsack. At the regimental command post, the commander even shook my hand to welcome me. Then there was a further march by the battalion command post to the company, which was commanded by Oberleutnant Bayer. I was immediately assigned my post as M.G. Schütz, Machine Gunner 1. The company had been resting for some days in the woods close to the regimental command point and the baggage train village of Chabino. We were about to go back up the line the following night and relieve another company. As the 7th Company was being relieved, I met Jochen Fiedler and his section leader, Krekler, our block seniors from St. Avold. Fiedler said that of the 11 of us, only 6 were with Infanterie Regiment 7. The others had joined Infanterie Regiment 232 or 235. The relief had proceeded smoothly, so that the sections, at intervals of several minutes and of course in single file, marched away to avoid making any noise and alerting the enemy. In the trenches during the day it was more or less quiet. The Russians fired off some shells only now and then, and those were only of light caliber. By contrast, during the night the Russians did not trust the calm, so the nights were dominated by a perpetual, blind cacophony of explosions. At midnight, when the summer night was at its darkest, for the first time I went alone on sentry duty. Somewhere else, and under other circumstances, I might have thought of Lenau's night, whose dark eye was resting on me solemn, gentle, dreamy, and unfathomably sweet. Nikolaus Lenau was a German lyric poet from 1802 to 1850. But then I had a redoubled sense of loneliness. I did not know my way about the positions, which was strange to me, and I had not yet seen them in daylight. I did not know where the enemy was, and could only guess where my fellow sentries were. I only knew the way from the sentry post to the bunker. For a short time I was overcome by a feeling of being deserted. It seemed to bode ill for my probation at the front that the company sarge, immediately after I arrived in the baggage train village, had ordered that I get my hair cut. Then at the field church service in the full glare of the sun, when I was wearing my Stahlhelm, I had felt ill. I felt completely alone. I had no view in the direction of the enemy, since our trenches were behind an incline. The only thing that happened during those first 2 hours on sentry duty was the tour of inspection by the company commander. I scarcely heard his approach. Eyes directed forward, I quietly made the regulation report. Nothing unusual to report. It was only on 14th July that I had to transfer into the 1st platoon of the company to take over the section of an NCO who was going on leave. A week or so later, we officer cadets were assembled in Chabinot, near to the regimental command post. We had to take yet one more revision course before our promotion to NCO. That was expected on 1st August. The course was given by Oberleutnant Steif, the then regimental adjutant. I met him again in 1975 in Vienna, where, as a Brigadegeneral in the German Bundeswehr, he was taking part in the negotiations which dragged on for years concerning bilateral reduction of forces in Europe. As far as we could see, the reason for the course was that the regimental commander wanted to get an idea of our theoretical knowledge and capabilities. On 1st August, I was proud to tell my mother and sisters that together with 5 other officer cadets, I had been promoted to Verteidigung Unteroffizier, Officer Cadet NCO. On that occasion, 3 of them received the EK2, Iron Cross 2nd Class. I was very pleased because my appendix didn't stop me. Because I was a few days short of the minimum 2 months probation period at the front, in actual fact, I should not have been allowed the promotion. However, the commander, Oberleutnant von Eisenhardt-Rothe, a gaunt gentleman with the elegance of a cavalryman and evidently of a similar elegance in thinking, took the responsibility upon himself. Then I wrote to my mother. I had a salary and the business of public assistance for the kids. The previous day, we sat together and wrote to our nearest and dearest with liquor and cigars. The official celebration of our promotion with the commander and some officers from the regimental staff was planned for the evening. Our celebration was part of it, because after the commander had left, Oberleutnant Roy, the commander of the 13th Infanterie-Geschütz Company, took over the presidency of the Corona, and we moved up into so-called increased drinking. I met Roy, who despite his 25 years, even back then had a bald patch at the division reunion in Stuttgart. While reminding him of that evening in Chabinot, I told him that it was he I had to thank for getting drunk worse than I ever had in my life. It happened that Roy, himself a drinker was known, ordered us officer cadets to drink up. Finally, to conclude the evening, he got what he got done within 5 minutes, all the drinks remaining in the glasses on the table. I managed it, too, under the astonished eyes of my comrades. But after a while, I had to take water rather than I must not have been able to manage to stay there for the rest of the night, because towards morning, I found myself lying in the fern beside the cottage in which we had our quarters. That was the end of the promotion celebrations. It was the next day when I was already back with my company, before I got over the hangover. I then took over the 8th section of the company again. On a piece of paper, I had written down for myself the names, dates of birth, occupations, and addresses of my men. The slip of paper I had folded twice and placed in my field hymn book. That little book, 5 by 7.5 centimeters in size and half a centimeter thick, was an army regulation, number 371, in a Protestant and a Catholic edition. It contained, in addition to the professional duties of the German soldier, the oath before the colors, and also extracts from the war letters of German soldiers killed in action. It had prayers, beginning with the Our Father, to the prayers in Gefahr, in danger, and in der Todesstunde, at the hour of death, for the dying. There were prayers for burials, chorales, and hymns, and finally Bible texts, designated the essential set.
Okay?
My men were Fusilier Wernsmuth, born 30th April 1923 in Stoll, a shopkeeper in Stoll. Gefreiter Helmut Budewig, born on 4th March 1922 in Hamburg, a student at Berlin-Steglitz. Gefreiter Albert Bickende, born on 3rd April 1913 in Rickendorf, Kreis Helmstedt, Brunswick. blacksmith in Brunswick. Gewehrschutz 1, Obergefreiter Anton Neumann, born on 11th December 1910 in Himmelwitz, Upper Silesia, tailor in Himmelwitz. Gewehrschutz 2, Fusilier Vladimir Stamer, born on 26th July 1909 in Sonnewitsch, Upper Silesia, baker's assistant in Gleiping. Gewehrschütze 3, Fusilier Otto Beer, born on 2nd December in Sübtitz, Kreis Torgau, agricultural work in Sübtitz. My deputy section leader was Obergefreiter Rudolf Kuchen, born 20th October 1919 in Vienna, automobile painter in Vienna. I can see the faces of almost all those men in my mind's eye as I read their names, even though I have never seen any of them since. I know that Mutz was killed in action a few days later, and that Budovich, a happy lad with a friendly face, was posted missing. Though I had reported from my post on sentry duty, nothing unusual to report to the company commander. The situation for the battalion suddenly changed drastically. I quote from the regimental history. Other fighting in which individual units were involved with divisions other than their own. The action of 2nd Infanterie Regiment 7, Bielhau, parts of Panzerjäger Eibtolung 252, 14th Infanterie Regiment 7, 14th Infanterie Regiment 461, under Oberst Karst as Kampfgruppe leader to be named. The alarm was sounded on 12 August 1942. Some 50 kilometers south of Guschatsk, in the region of the 3rd Panzer Army and the area of 9th Army Corps and 20th, the Soviets had succeeded in breaking into the positions of the division. They were the 183rd Infanterie Division and the 292nd Infanterie Division. Especially in the area of the 183rd Infanterie Division, the Russians had succeeded in penetrating deep into the main combat area. A breakthrough threatened. The Kampfgruppe was loaded on lorries and driven up to the main highway leading south from Guschatsk. They were uploaded in Opolossi and placed under the command of the 292nd Infanterie Division. Marching up beside the road, partly on Corduroy Road, the scattered 2nd Infanterie Regiment 7 reached Schillenki to take a rest. A supply dump that was being dismantled served to strengthen morale. Hordes of army baggage handlers were fleeing back to the rear, parts of the baggage train and flak units were getting ready to flee. All of that characterized the situation. Although it all reeked of retreat and disorder, the Kampfgruppe was in the kind of mood to advance. In a wood near Schillenki, west of the highway, positions were taken up facing south. To the east of the highway, 2nd Infanterie Regiment 131 had taken up position. That Battalion 2 was placed under the command of Kampfgruppe Karst. Further to the east was a gap up to 2nd Infanterie Regiment 351. It appeared that eastwards there was a coherent front, but the situation to the west of the positions of 2nd Infanterie Regiment 7 was completely unclear. There, the 183rd Infanterie Regiment appeared to have broken through. Scarcely had 2nd Infanterie Regiment 7 hastily dug into the woodland at about 8 p.m. on 14th August 1942 than the enemy armored attack began. It was beaten back with bloody casualties. Further armored attacks followed, in which it was mostly only individual tanks that succeeded in breaking the main line of resistance. A few anti-tank weapons did not succeed in dispatching the tanks that had broken through, so the infantry had to do it at close range. After an unquiet night on 13th August at 6:15 a.m., the Soviets again attacked with armor and infantry. With the energetic support of the artillery, it was possible to repulse all enemy attacks. But to the west of the position, the Soviets had succeeded in pushing forward through a gap towards Bezny. By striking out wider, they encircled 2nd Infanterie Regiment 7. With Kampfgruppe Karst taking up a position of all-round defense, it was possible to block the highway successfully further on. On 17th August, heavy fighting was taking place around the village of Schillenki, while the 292nd Infanterie Division withdrew to a line further to the north. Seriously combat-weary, completely soaked with only cold rations, the troops were partly broken through in a very strong armored attack. they had to make a fighting withdrawal onto the Upoluzi high ground. As a result, Upoluzi itself was drawn into the bridgehead position. West of Upoluzi, the enemy had broken through at Popovska. That was Infanteria Regiment 19. One company of Panzer Abteilung 80 was placed under the command of Kampf Rupert Carl and supported the enemy. A Stuka attack in the early morning of 18th August, Cholny, and the wooded territories to the southeast of Upoluzi won some more regions. Enemy army assembled immediately south of Cholny was shattered by artillery fire. The gap to the west of Kampfgruppe Karst still yawned. On the eastern wing, Feldersatz-Bataillon 292, then under the command of the Kampfgruppe, maintained the connection. Renewed enemy attempts to assemble armor were successfully opposed by the artillery, but it was not possible to prevent Soviet infantry with armor from advancing to the west of Upoluzi, northward across the Wirtz. The enemy seemed from this point to have shifted the emphasis of their attack from the east against 292nd Infanteria Division. They moved opposite the sector held by Kampfgruppe Karst and further westwards. The intervention of Infanteria Regiment 82 on 20th August and the arrival of Infanteria Regiment 282 had a relieving effect on the Kampfgruppe. On 24th August, it was possible to repulse a large-scale enemy attack on the Upoluzi sector. But further to the west, the enemy succeeded in taking Bekrino and Chilenska. On 1st September, Oberst Karst was decorated with a Knight's Cross for personal gallantry in counter-attacking. On 2nd September, fresh enemy attacks took place against the Upoluzi bridgehead, but they were all repulsed. Only on 6th September were orders executed for the planned evacuation of that position. Bataillon Wielhauer returned to the division with a combat strength of about 80 men. A small barracks at Waldlager Nord was sufficient to provide accommodation for that little band. My personal experience was more exciting than the picture by the dry report from the regimental history. During the night, the battalion was relieved from its position and removed from the division's field reserve. I handed over my section sector and the stocks of ammunition, hand grenades and machine gun belts. We thought it was a relief that those supplies did not need to be dragged along. I marched off with a section in the direction of the assembly area to which we had been ordered. Company after company joined us on the route. Soon the whole battalion was on the march with us. We went in line, one behind the other, at long intervals, in order to invite as few casualties as possible in the event that we were attacked from the air or fired on. From Shabino, the baggage train village, the battalion went to Kashatsk, to the camp in the woods some kilometers north of the town. In the summer of 1941, that camp had served as the headquarters to the Russian Supreme Commander, Central Sector, Marshal Timoshenko. Hauptfeldwebel Melin, the Sarge, a strict, self-possessed man, had his cross with the drivers, not only those of the horse-drawn vehicles. In a mighty voice he gave out his orders. In pure Silesian, one of them asked, "What are we for tech, Herr Hauptfeld?" And the Hauptfeldwebel replied, "Tech de Porsche," by which he meant a captured French Peugeot lorry. Several ways led to Kashatsk. The one that went via Steroy was the furthest, but was better for the vehicles and the Peugeot. We followed the route that had more corduroy roads and was therefore better. But even so, to the accompaniment of dreadful cursing, horses and motor vehicles had to be heaved out of the sticky mud. On the way, it was passed from man to man that we had set off as Army Reserve and should be getting some rest. I believed it. The old hands did not. On 23rd August 1942, in the brightness of the dawn morning, we arrived in the camp in the woods and settled ourselves down in the barracks. I slept for some hours. Towards noon there was something to eat, and afterwards there was a frontline film show. While the film Der große Schatten, the Great Shadow, was still running, the battalion adjutant shouted, "Alert!" Barely 5 minutes later the battalion was standing ready to march. When the lorries of an army mobile column arrived, we were immediately loaded up. We were told that the Russians had broken through at Yukhnov, and that we were to be thrown into the gap created by that move. The journey through the bare countryside, only here and there crossed by bushes and woods, was not exactly pleasant. We travelled standing, squatting, or sitting on machine gun boxes. The oldies who had taken part in the advance and the winter retreat said that it was no picnic which awaited us. We younger ones, dropped in the shit again, did indeed feel the tension hanging over everyone. It could be read in the expressions of the officers, but it was more with curiosity and interest than with fear that we looked forward to the things that this fire brigade action would bring. Outside the village of Shalenska, some 30 kilometers northwest of Medin, we were unloaded. Immediately a security line was formed in platoon strength in the direction of the enemy. I lay with my section beside the road that led to the enemy. Somewhere in front there were still supposed to be German troops. No one knew anymore. A motorcycle with sidecar drove up from behind us. A strange officer got out. To my report, he said, sounding surprised, "Infanterie Regiment 7? My God, that's an active regiment." To my ears, it sounded as if he had determined that from then nothing else could happen, and that it was a dead certainty that the Russian breakthrough would be cleaned up. Just as we had hastily dug in, I was taken by a runner to the battalion commander. He ordered me and the section to carry out a reconnaissance patrol into the woods that lay about 2 kilometers in front of us. The object was to find out if they were occupied by the enemy. It was my first reconnaissance patrol. It was the real thing, the active beginning of my probation at the front. On the successful completion of this depended my whole life's ambition. I instructed the men, and we set off. The first signs of dusk were just becoming noticeable when we reached the woodland. We went in line, spaced widely apart, but could see no trace of the enemy. We crossed a tongue of woodland, while I, as I had learned during training, tracked our direction of march with a compass. Finally, we marched in a long curve, leftwards as far as the road and turned back. Halfway, the battalion met us. In the meantime, they had been ordered to take up positions in front of the wood, facing the enemy. The tongue of woodland we had just crossed was the edge of a larger forest that stretched over to the right. It offered the Russians a good opportunity to take us unopposed in the rear. An attempt was then made to counter the danger by having the 7th Company take up position almost at right angles to the forward deployed 5th and 6th Companies. We would provide cover for the battalion from the direction of the wood. To my disappointment, my section was held in reserve. We had to dig in again, but on fairly open ground. By that time, night had fallen, and it seemed to me that we would not be staying in that position for very long. I had the men dig only moderately deep foxholes, just deep enough to be able to snatch some hours' sleep in them with adequate protection against shell splinters. The foxhole I had myself dug barely reached to my knees, so that my body, lying on bushes as a kind of bedding and covered in the same way, did not protrude above the level of the ground. Within moments, there crept over me the uncomfortable thought that I was lying in a coffin. Night passed and gave way to morning. The enemy, it was said, were preparing to attack. From my coffin, I watched uneasily as to the right of the sector, the 7th Company, 300 meters to 400 meters away, individual brown figures at intervals of a minute or so were jumping across a small clearing between covering undergrowth. To judge from the direction in which they were moving, they were evidently trying to get into the tongue of wood lying to the battalion's rear. The Russians were demonstrating their well-tried tactic of trickling wood. You could work out how long it would take a company or still larger units to have gathered in the wood behind them. Those movements had been reported to the front. Then the orders I had expected reached. With my section, I had to take up position at the extreme wing of the 7th Company facing west in thick woodland. There was virtually no field of fire. In places, it was only 5 to 10 meters. On the left, I was beside the section led by Kreckler, our old block senior. On the right, there were no neighbors at all. When Kreckler and I saw each other, neither of us thought of our time together being polished up into soldiers. True, it was a time that had not been as much an effort for him as it had been for me. We just shook hands and said as if with one voice, "Hey lad, what a bloody mess." Once again, it was the old story of hitting. After we had finished, it began to rain. Thin, continuous streams of rain trickled down from the sky. Sooner or later, it would have soaked us to the skin. Of the enemy, there was nothing more to be heard. We could only suspect that they must be somewhere in front of us, in the wood, in considerable numbers. Wrapped in branches and tarpaulins, we tried to protect ourselves from the penetrating rain that fell even more. Soon water began to gather in the foxholes. Hours passed. Still there was no end to the rain. The sound of the rain and the wind and the darkness of night as it began to fall could almost make us forget that we were on the front line and had to watch out for an enemy. After I had assigned the watch, I tried, as I sat on the hollow side of my Stahlhelm in the puddles of my foxhole, to find some degree of comfort. I was shaken out of my chilly doze when the order came to take 2 men on a reconnaissance patrol in the wood. I had...
Wait! You're with the Empire!
Talk fast, or I'm leaving.
Wait! Don't go! Open the door. We don't care about the Republic. We just want out.
Run, before I change my mind.
The Republic was wrong about you. Thanks.
To find where the Russians were. It seemed pointless to me. The rain was getting even heavier. There was complete darkness. It was already midnight. I considered the task to be well nigh impossible. I would either find out nothing at all, or possibly run right through the foxholes that the Russians had dug for themselves. I could lose my way despite the compass, or even fall into a Russian foxhole unawares. In any of those cases, the reconnaissance I was ordered to carry out would show no satisfactory result. I chose 2 volunteers, and we set off. It was so dark that from time to time each of us had to keep hold of the other so as not to get separated. Again and again we would stop and crouch down to listen. The darkness of the wood and the crackling rain did not allow us to hear or to see anything. With my machine pistol cocked, I felt my way and crept forward with my finger on the trigger, always expecting to be fired on suddenly out of the darkness, or to bump into a Russian, or at least a tree.
According to your exacting specifications,
Then,
Master.
in a clearing, the existence of which was more to be sensed than seen, there was a sound that did not fit with the symphony of the storm. We dropped straight to the ground and saw a section of Russians, 6 or 8 men, cross the clearing. I saw their silhouettes, the contours of the plain, old-style Russian helmets outlined against the sky. They came quite close to us, went past, and were swallowed up in the darkness. My 2 men, experienced Oberg fighters, did not think of giving themselves away. As for me, however, my heart stood still. I held my breath and pressed the trigger. The bolt of the machine pistol shot forward with a crack, but no shot was fired. There was a blockage. Despite that mishap, nothing happened. In the wind and rain, the Russians had heard nothing. We turned round, and with the help of the compass, searching and feeling our way, we reached our positions. I reported our observation. At about 1:30 a.m. on 15th August 1942, the kitchen arrived after almost 2 days. It brought cold bean soup that had gone sour. Even so, it was gulped down ravenously. In the foxhole under the dripping tarpaulin, I dismantled the machine pistol by the light of a tallow candle and cleaned it with clammy wet fingers. Sand and water had caused the blockage during the reconnaissance patrol. In the open country, it should have become light soon after this. But in the wood, nothing could be seen of the dawning day. Only towards 3 a.m. did the coming day show itself. At the same time, men's voices could be heard from the direction of the enemy. They indicated that the enemy were pushing forward. By means of loud shouts, the Russians ensured the movement. They came nearer and nearer. We had to let them approach to within 10 meters of us because we could not see them soon. Once again, I went from foxhole to foxhole and gave instructions, especially to the leading machine gun. Both he and I were facing our first real battle. The young Pomeranian had arrived a few days before with the replacements. It was the first time since the beginning of the Russian campaign that, for the Silesian regiment, The replacements did not come from Silesia. The Russian voices became louder. There was the crackling of branches. They must already have come to within 50 meters of us. Meanwhile, we stood in our foxholes and stared into the undergrowth out of which they had to appear. They were there, at last. The place was heaving with brown...
I'd lost you there.
Figures. The wood seemed to be spitting them out. To judge by the direction of their bodies and their eyes, they intended to push by obliquely on the right. We fired on them from the flank. The machine gunner was scattering the first bursts of fire from his weapon. In what direction was he firing? He didn't seem to be hitting anything, because I saw no Russians falling. But he had to be hitting them. They were no more than 10 paces away. This time, my machine pistol did not misfire, but I caught myself not aiming at all. I was simply pointing the gun and pulling the trigger, but I was firing too high. I pointed lower. Out of the cluster of brown figures into which the machine gun was spraying its bullets, a tall young Russian came forward and flung an egg hand grenade at the machine gunner. The latter was still trying to get out and change position with a machine gun while I gave him covering fire. Then the grenade exploded and the poor young lad collapsed half out of his cover across his machine gun. The men from my section had withdrawn. I had lost contact with them. I was standing alone when a hand grenade rolled up at my feet. Darting from side to side, I jumped back. There was nothing else I could do. I had to leave the dead machine gunner and his weapon where they lay. Quite some time later, the section was ordered back to the battalion. I reported again to the company commander, who was glad that we had been able to withdraw. He was holding the section in reserve at the command post. We took up our coffin holes from the previous night and hurriedly made them deeper. Things did not remain quiet for long. The pressure on the 5th and 6th companies was even greater. One infantry attack had already been beaten off. During the next few hours, it was announced that we were getting air support, and the order was given to lay out the aerial recognition cloths. Ground troops carried those cloths with them so as to identify themselves at any given time to their own air force. They were about 1 square meter in size, either orange-colored cloths or swastika flags. They were to be spread out on the ground, on buildings or on vehicles. The loud sound of engines announced the arrival of the aircraft. The approaching aeroplanes gave us cause for hope. Despite the extremely serious situation, a feeling of strength overcame us, because up to then we had seen nothing of the Russians. First a flight of Stukas, Junkers 87 flew in. Almost vertically they dived down with their engines screaming. The detonations of the bombs followed. Then a squadron of U-88s also attacked. And finally, H.E. Heinkel 111 bombers. Unfortunately, ahead of the 5th Company sector, they had dropped their bombs too short. They were dead and wounded. Among them was the excellent company commander, Oberleutnant Eskin. Not long after that short pause, there suddenly rang out shouts of, "Tanks! Tanks!" And for the first time in my life, I heard the characteristic dull rumble, that unforgettable grinding noise of heavy tank engines. A scout car was the first to drive from the left through our lines. Unconcerned, he rattled on up the Savinci-Upolozi road. When he got as far as the battalion command post, he was polished off with one shot from a 5-centimeter anti-tank gun. From my inactivity in the reserve, I was able to watch from the command post how the gunners let him approach, and then, from 30 meters range, let him tap so that he lurched to a halt. With his hands in the air, a barefoot Russian smeared with blood and oil crept up. Our company commander told us a few days later that the prisoner said the Russians deployed entire families as tank crews. The husband was the driver, the wife aimed and fired the gun, and the adolescent son loaded the gun. You could well believe it. From the tongue of woodland where the 7th Company and my section had been, shortly after the scout car had been destroyed, a single Russian ran out with loud cries. He shouted in a hoarse voice, "Kamerad, Kamerad," as if he himself wanted to desert to, or wanted us to desert to his side. He held up one hand, gesticulating. But suddenly the older man pulled a hand grenade from his pocket, pulled out the pin, and held the grenade in the air. It exploded and mangled his hand. Thereupon he ran back into the woodland, wailing loudly.
But I'd lost you there.
What he wanted remained a mystery to all of us. The Russians again mounted a frontal attack on the main fighting line with tanks and infantry. The tanks fired with their cannon and machine guns while we were under heavy mortar fire. In front, they were shouting "Air!" and were already breaking through. A runner came under the heaviest covering fire. And the Portuguese had realized without intelligence that the main fighting line could not be held. Oberleutnant Bayer, the commander, without waiting for orders from the battalion, decided to withdraw some 100 meters. On his order, the entire company ran across the short stretch of level ground. When they had reached the level of the command post, he too ran back, and I with him. The Oberleutnant, in a bleached summer tunic with a yellow-brown belt, knew that he presented a particularly good target for the enemy. He sprinted like a runner in a race, and had overtaken the company in no time. Behind us, the tanks rattled up, firing with everything they had, while our men ran back in front of us. Where were the anti-tanks? At the edge of a small hollow in which the company was then to take up position, the battalion commander, Kellhauer, stood erect, unmoving, and without cover. Only his moist eyes gave any sign of how moved he was. And then the words, "Bayer, lad, you can't just bolt with the lads." From his words there spoke the complete shock that German infantrymen had given up a position without higher orders and had given way to enemy pressure. The fact that it had happened in the form of a completely orderly withdrawal, and the men had immediately taken up positions again, altered nothing of that inconceivable fact. Hitherto there had never been such an event in the British history. In December, facing Moscow, they had to withdraw, but that was following orders. Even so, the tears had run down Oberst Bürger's frozen cheeks, as those who were there tell with all. While I was running back over the level ground, the right-hand pocket of my tunic had been shot through. Even in retrospect, that discovery sent a jolt of horror through my limbs, because in this pocket I was carrying 2 egg hand grenades. A tank shell had lacerated the company commander's breeches. A Feldwebel had had a grenade in his hand, shot through by a bullet, luckily without it hitting the detonator. The fire became heavier. It even compelled those who were tired to dig in hurriedly. The hollow at the edge of which we then found ourselves attracted the enemy mortar fire like a magnet. The strikes were good. For us, they were dangerously near. I was still standing in the open. Some 15 meters from me, a shell hit a fully occupied foxhole. A Gefreiter with blonde hair and chalk-white face was somersaulted by the blast of the explosion some 5 or 6 meters out of the hole. All around, the earth was spraying up with the shells exploding. There rang out the blood-curdling screams of a fatally wounded man crying for his mother. I used to think that was an invention of fiction writers. After a while, in obviously unbearable agony, he looked at Bayer and cried, "Herr Oberleutnant, shoot me!" Bayer, at other times never at a loss for words, shrugged his shoulders helplessly and turned away without a word. God Almighty, let it soon be easy. Unsure under the stress of being in the thick of events and under cover in the hollow, I could see nothing of the enemy. In the immediate main line of resistance, 50 meters further forward, I would have been able to survey the ground. I would have seen them attacking and breaking through. I would have been able myself to take aim and fire. But there at the company command post, I was condemned to wait under grueling fire, unable to do anything. Finally, the decisive attack was made. 3 tanks of the types KV-1 and KV-2, the latter 56 tons in weight and armed with a 15-centimeter howitzer, drove up the road and through the battalion's front. The anti-aircraft guns were gone, the anti-tank unit long since lost. From in front, there rang out, "Ore!" Then our men were getting out of their trenches and retreating. They could no longer be stopped. The tanks had also overrun the field dressing stations, where a number of wounded were waiting to be transported away. The tanks then formed up some 200 meters behind the scattering remains of the battalion, in a triangle. On the elevated open ground, each one gave the other cover. Beside the knocked-out scout car, I noticed as I passed the dead platoon commander of the company. A man took his pay book and broke off his identification tag. I could see no outward injury in the dead man. It must have been a tiny splinter in the head or in the heart that brought his life. While I was standing by the dead man, suddenly I could no longer see any of my own men. The air was ringing out again with "Ore!" the whistling and bursting of the shells and infantry guns. Even the company commander was no longer to be seen. So I hurried after some Landwehr who were striving to get across a small hollow to a wood, evidently with the intention of getting around. I caught up with them, and we hurried together along the edge of the woodland to get past the firing monsters. After we had successfully got round them, we reached a river that had overflowed its banks. From somewhere or other, bullets crackled in the water. I began to wade and sank deeper and deeper. With one hand, I held my machine pistol over my head. In the deepest places, I had to move as if swimming. Soon I felt the bottom under my feet. Again and again, probably from one of the tanks.
The Republic soldiers that killed your squad are no longer a threat.
I've called headquarters for reinforcements. Next squad should be here soon to hold the place. But we couldn't have secured it without you. Can't thank you enough. Payback is satisfying.
Do you require medical attention? Be well.
A machine gun spat fire at us. The fellow must be able to see us. What should I do now? Inexperienced as I was, I thought myself to be the only survivor of the company. The men with me belonged to another unit. We decided to look for the baggage trains, which surely had to be in one of the neighboring villages. Night had fallen by the time we found them. The Sarge welcomed me. There was not one word of reproach. He knew what had happened. I had to make my report. I did so and was secretly ashamed that I had run to the baggage village instead of looking for my comrades further forwards. The Sarge left me no time for that. He himself gave me fresh, dry clothes and ordered me to sleep in late. The next day at noon I was to go forwards again with a food vehicle. Then he took me into a floor-boarded room in a Russian house in which 9 other scattered men were sleeping. I lay down with them, my haversack under my head.
The explosives have been
floor.
A convoy destroyed.
Excuse me? Who is this? What happened to Bravo team?
Bravo team died without completing their mission. I picked up where they left off.
Dead? Then we're fortunate you came along. I'm humbled and grateful. Taking out that convoy saved our skins. We owe you more than thanks for taking on this job, but thank you.
Of the farm cottage. On the morning of 16th August 1942, I awoke from a leaden sleep with a feeling that I had only just gone to sleep. Washing, shaving, the fresh clothes without lice, what a joy! Then I inspected the contents of my pockets.
All authorized destinations.
The letters were washed out, the photographs stuck together and useless. But worse still, my paybook was similarly illegible. Some of my papers, among them my driving license, were missing. I had just put them down in my gas mask case with my gas mask, and then forgotten them when the CO gave the order to withdraw. During the previous days, I had not dared to think of the imminent end of my probation. But the fact that the order to return to my regiment came on that very morning was a new piece of good fortune. Then I only needed to report in up front. With that relieving certainty, I joined the food vehicle. The Russians were taking a breather. The company was not even under fire. The command post was based in a house, not in a hole in the ground. The CO was pleased to see me when I reported, and immediately gave notice of departure. He looked weary and had long stubble. He had once again had uncanny luck, he said. When he was standing under cover behind a hayrick, a tank shell came through the several meters of hay, but was slowed down so much that only its head came out on the other side. There it was finally brought to a halt by Bayer's belt buckle. It gave him quite a fright, but nothing happened. It did not explode. He wished me all the best for the journey home and sent his greetings to the regiment. Then I left. But however depressing the events of the last few days had been, and however much I was looking forward to getting to War College, it was not an easy thing for me to leave.
The mines are poisoned. The Republic's running scared.
Excellent work. You also did a fine job raising their emplacements. My forces will have no trouble cleaning up your scraps. Our next move is to hit the Republic again. Hard. Send him in, quickly. Grag is a leader of the Hutt cartel. He keeps repulsive company, but he's proven a valuable ally.
I'm not sure that's such a good idea.
Don't worry. Grag is dependable.
He's here to make amends for the three families. A band of venom-sniffing Hutts.
They violated the cartel's neutrality to help the Republic's mining operation on Quesh.
Such favoritism deeply upset the Empire. The cartel claimed ignorance and disowned the three families.
Is there a point in all of this?
I simply remind you that the Empire's not alone. As a cartel leader, Grag kindly volunteered to help us punish the three families. Grag, you finally grace us with your presence. Let me introduce the Empire's greatest weapon on Quesh.
I'd ask you to bow to my magnificence, but, well, you know.
The three families won't be vulnerable until we sever their income. Are you ready to kill these Jedi and cripple the Republic's adrenal production?
Time to hit the Republic where it hurts.
Grag, have your army hold the factories. Don't allow the Republic a second's rest. Cut down the Jedi defenders. Then either destroy the adrenal production lines or kill the Selkath scientists operating them.
The scientists are just doing their job. I'll cripple their equipment.
If that's your choice, just don't return until those factories have ground to a halt.
Oh, yeah.
At your service, my lord. Travel route is confirmed.
Leave the company. It seemed to me undeserved that the shyster, I have to use the proper expression for the action, should be at an end for me of all people. Among many others, even our old friend Krekler had been killed. The battalion of more than 500 men had shrunk to a fifth that size. The 6th then only numbered 26 men. With such thoughts in my mind, I got into the lorry traveling to the division. As we were driving out of the baggage village, rifle fire was cracking behind us into the morass of the road. The road was under
My results
enemy
speak for
observation.
themselves.
3. October 1942 to January 1943. Training courses and promotion. Officers' courses in Dresden. Promoted to Lieutenant. Commander's course in Berlin. Aged 19 years. The effects of the Upalosi adventure were with me for a long time.